Daniel Lanois is a Canadian musician, producer, and songwriter who has made an indelible mark on the music industry. He first gained recognition in the 1980s for his innovative production techniques, which blended traditional and electronic instrumentation, and for his collaborations with visionary musician and producer Brian Eno. Together, they created seminal ambient albums such as Apollo, Atmospheres and Soundtracks, and Thursday Afternoon. Lanois' impressive discography includes producing some of the most iconic albums of the past few decades, including U2's Joshua Tree and Actung Baby, Peter Gabriel's So, and Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind. He's also worked with a diverse range of artists such as Emmylou Harris, Neil Young, Robbie Robertson, and Willie Nelson. In addition to his work behind the scenes, Lanois released several solo albums that have garnered critical acclaim and has been recognized with numerous awards for his contributions to music, including 7 Grammy Awards and induction into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame in 2005. He continues to create innovative music and inspire others with his unique sound, which blends rock, folk, and ambient elements in unexpected and captivating ways. Lanois' influence on the contemporary music scene is undeniable, and his work will undoubtedly continue to inspire future generations of musicians and producers. Here's my interview. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you very much, Rick, for taking an interest in my music. It's nice to be in this beautiful front room where so much has happened before, both of us.
Thank you for inviting me here. This is a beautiful, beautiful place. How important is it to have a place like this to create music in versus a studio? I know you've worked a lot in both. You've worked in environments like this, you've worked in studio environments.
I appreciate both. I like the formal studio because there's somebody else down the hall doing something else that might be interesting, and so the chance meetings that happen in formal studios are nice. In this setting, I made a Neil Young record in this very room, and we thought privacy would be better for this record I was making with Neil because he was largely by himself. And so we just wanted a beautiful setting because it was recording 10 songs, but also filming 10 songs. So we wanted an environment that was inspiring. Listen, man, in modern times, we can make records anywhere. We can make them in a bathroom on an airplane. If the walls hold some stories in them and there's something about the environment that could inspire it, then let it be. So that's the advantage to unusual locations.
Okay, speaking of unusual locations, let's talk about your mom's house and when you first started recording. What kind of gear did you have and how did that begin?
The studio in my mom's basement started out with just a little flea market recorder, and it had advantages. It had an onboard microphone. It was tied to the recorder, Rick. And then it had speakers on board as well. So you spool the tape, record, wind back, and play right away, so instant sound. Started with that, and then a good few years later I was able to afford a proper recording console and a 4-track machine. And I did that with my brother Bob. And but you couldn't buy a console at a music store, so we had to have one custom made. There was a couple of local techs, they were getting started in the electronic business. So they worked with my brother and we built our own homemade console.
Really?
Yeah.
Now where is that now? Is that anywhere?
I wish I still had it because it'd be fun to see it in the flesh, now that I'm talking about it. But I sold it to a friend and it just kind of disappeared. I might look for it one day though.
And how did you decide what to build? Did you guys talk about it? Did you and your brother say we need this many inputs?
Well, we knew that we would want the sound to go to 4 different places because it's a 4-track machine.
Yep.
So my brother designed a little switching system so that a given channel could go to one of the 4 tracks, just called track assignment.
Yep.
It was a very simple circuitry. Each channel had one integrated circuit, one op amp. That would be laughable by modern standards. But because it was not complicated electronically, the signal path was such that it was very clear sounding.
Right.
Because it wasn't too complex. And so we got really used to the open sound of this. It had no equalization, no tone control. It was just, and no faders. They were just big knobs, turn up the volume, and then that was it. So because we couldn't change the sound of a given mic sound, we just made sure that we had got it right with the microphone to begin with. So that was the...
That's a great lesson too, right? Mic placement, how to where things sound the best. right? Learning that without an EQ.
Mic placement is a big lesson, and what we talked about in the kitchen. We already did all this for the audience. No, in the kitchen, all the best stuff got said in the kitchen. So we talked about house sound. So if you have a nice piano, then have it mic'd already, so you're not wasting people's time when they come in waiting for the piano to be mic'd. So the sweet spot has already been found in the mic placement.
Yeah.
And muffle down so the drums don't leak in and all that. So all that's called good preparation. Drum kit, house drum kit, nailed to the floor. That's the sweet spot again. And the bass, plug the bass in there. So in a matter of minutes, you can hear a sound in my studio called house sound. We just stole the idea from Motown in Detroit because we heard they did it. I never even went, but I heard the mythology. So I thought that would be a nice thing to do in Hamilton, Ontario.
Okay, so we talked about Rick James coming in, who was from Buffalo, who came in to record at your mom's house. I mean, that is, I can't even fathom that. What was that like?
Well, as you pointed out, Rick lived in Buffalo, and Hamilton is on the Canadian side, not far from Buffalo. And Rick was already quite well known in that Canadian region because he was in a band with Neil Young called the Minor Birds, and they were signed to Motown, speaking of Motown. And so we had a mutual friend, Eddie Roth, who was a great organist, and he made the introduction. He said he's not working with Neil anymore because he got busted at the Detroit border for draft dodging, but they let him go, and now he's looking to make some new recordings. But anyhow, what a lesson for me. Imagine Rick James being in.
So he comes in, and what?
He played everything. It was staggering. I had never been exposed to that kind of talent. And so I just kept my mouth shut and let everything unfold. And Rick ran the show, Let me play the drums, here's the bass, premix this down to one track, and we'll do some overdubs. And in a matter of half an hour, there's an incredible track coming out of the speakers. I thought, how lucky am I?
Wow. So eventually, you and Brian Eno connected. Tell me about how that connection happened.
Well, Eno coming into my life at that point was just really great timing because my skills were good, and I'm talented, and this guy comes in and he has a vision to make instrumental music. And the first project was. We got to this Apollo space missions project, but the first one was a record by Harold Budd called Plateau of Mirror. Mm-hmm. And Brian had already done the piano recordings in New York, and he came to Hamilton to continue with them, to add sounds and manipulate sound and build it into something, find a new dimension for these piano recordings. How did it happen? I had made some demos with these two women called the Time Twins. They went to New York, met Eno, played him the tracks. He said, well, these are very interesting sonically. Where'd you make these? So my name came up. Eno had a friend in Toronto at the time, so it was just
chance, really.
Chance. But we talked about chance in the kitchen. If good work had not already been done with the Time Twins, then Eno wouldn't have noticed it.
That's right.
And so it's not just, having an agent or who do you meet at a party. It was something that happened because he heard music that I had done that he liked.
Now, these beautiful sounds that you guys came up with, we talked about limitation, how important having limitations are to creativity. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I suppose getting good at a few things would be better than flirting with a lot and not becoming an expert. So at the time, we only had 3 boxes of sound effects.
Okay, which were?
I had this very nice German reverb machine called the EMT 250. Looks like this little robot with levers on it.
Oh yeah.
Had an AMS harmonizer, and then we had a Lexicon Prime Time, and that was it. And the nice thing about the Lexicon, it has a voltage control oscillator. For those who don't know what that does, it puts a little bit of a wobble in the sound. So, turn on the VCO, so you get a little bit of a vibrato. And if you play with the VCO as a performance is happening, then you can get it sounding like a human voice. But the basis of the whole sound was listen to your special effects coming back in the console, but you float them. You don't just have them in the mix. you send them to specific tracks, you treat them like overdubs. So if we were lucky enough to hit on a special sound for a certain section of a piece of music, I press record, and then that sequence, that paragraph, whatever, however you want to call it, that would be now carved in stone.
Like a sound design that happened for this
It happened at that moment.
Yeah.
This is long before total recall systems or one button on the computer, you get back to where you were the day before. No, we cherished our discoveries, and we made sure that we printed them as they happened. So I don't know if there's a camera analogy for all this, but if the sun flared in a certain manner, then Pavel would say, that's really good. Let's optimize the flare and so on, because it belonged to that moment. You wouldn't wait to get to the editing room to jazz me up. I'm already jazzy.
You guys really mastered these things, these few things that you had. How did you even come about getting the lexicon, getting the EMT? Are these things that you bought for your studio over time?
The few pieces of processing equipment I had at the time were bought with hard-earned cash.
Yeah, and they were not cheap at the time either.
No, in fact, that EMT I think was worth $50,000.
Yeah,
it was expensive stuff. And how does one get enough cash to buy all that stuff? Well, you probably have to go to the bank.
Yeah.
Or just put in the years. And yeah, I mean, just not to play the poverty game here or anything, but my brother and I came up, single mom, 4 kids, hairdresser, and so there was no advance inheritance available.
Right.
So we just worked hard and made a lot of records, made a bit of cash, kept putting the money, take the money and put it back into gear and get better gear and try and get better and better.
Were you always looking for sounds and if I had this compressor, or I'd like to try this thing out, this microphone, and you gradually accumulate different things to create different signal paths?
Well, getting back to the house sound idea, that if we were lucky enough to come upon a sound that we thought was special, then we wouldn't break that sound down. So if it's a certain bass guitar through a certain compressor or an EQ, like that's a great sound, okay, don't change it. Because the next section that comes in, they might appreciate jumping on something that already came to be through some research. Sure. And hit and miss and whatnot. And we always stayed with that philosophy. So if you're lucky enough to have something that you believe in, that belongs to you, then don't tear it down, keep it going. And that's what I did with Eno when we floated our sounds and we printed them. Now a little bit of the secret weapon is you can take those printed sounds and send them back into the chain again, and maybe even a third time. And that's when it starts getting wild and celestial and far out and unexpected harmonics coming your way, and house sound, house sound, house sound. Can't say enough about it.
How do you like recording bass, for example? Do you use a DI? Do you use mic the amp? Do you prefer one over the other? Do you record both and use one?
Yeah. Some of the best results I've had with bass are with electronic bass. So I have a set of Moog Taurus pedals, for example. Mm-hmm. And I introduced Neil Young to that. So we had a way of, with an octave divider, we had a way of getting his guitar to have a lower octave. But not all the notes track correctly, because it was just kind of a cheap trinket of an idea.
Yeah.
Wherever the guitar didn't track properly, I would overdub the Taurus pedals on those missing notes. And Neil came in and said, boy, you got the guitar sounding pretty good. I said, well, I'll show you my tricks. I brought out the bass machine. He said, the bass machine, great, he had so much fun with it. Beyond that, we just use what other people use. I have some nice bass guitars. I've got an Epiphone from the early 60s that has a great sound if you play it lightly. I discovered from having spent time in Jamaica, that the Jamaican players played very lightly with the right hand, but turn up loud and with a lot of bottom on the amp. So boom, boom, boom. It's not dang, no. Don't choke the note. Let the note blossom. And so those Jamaican lessons, I try and use them.
Do you use that for your guitar playing as well too, where you turn up the amp loud and you'll play quietly do things like that?
Well, it's the philosophy could apply to drums and guitar as well. So if you're not blazing all the time, then you have what we call headroom.
Yeah.
So someplace to go to dynamically, so you're not full on all the time. So you might play ding 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 dong da da dong 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 ding 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 dong, and that would be the dynamic range, let's say, available to you for that piece of music. So you don't want to just be pulling a china shop right out of the gate. Leave yourself someplace to go to dynamically. Drums the same thing. If you hit a drum too hard, you kill the tone. But if when you hear those old Hendrix records, that's pretty much jazz drumming, philosophically in terms of sound. But it meant that Mitch Mitchell had a place to go to. You know, if he chose to really give it and go to an explosive moment, the drums had some place to go to because you hadn't killed them with volume to begin with. So you had your soft and your highs available to you.
The idea of dynamics in music, this is something that in a lot of today's music doesn't really exist, or the people that play performances. And performances to me always seemed important in the records that you produced, actually having takes, drum takes that go all the way through, or performances that have highs and lows. Although maybe you did punch in on things or edit sections together. Tell me your philosophy on that.
Well, we only continue working on something if what we already have has a bit of magic to it. Now, that's a very mysterious area to talk about, because magic could be a melody or a chord sequence, or it could be a riff that somebody played in an unexpected manner. And so we cherish those little moments of magic and let them be the guide to the next place that we could get to with it. What we try and avoid is to have something that's not that great. Well, we'll fix it in the mix, or bear with us, we'll get to that place where magic will happen. That has never worked for me. So we only continue with something if it has that little spark to it to begin with.
Are there songs that you can think of that you worked on as a producer that took forever to get, where a part that ended up being an important part but took forever?
Well, I've made very fast records. I made a 4-day record with Willie Nelson, but we'll come. I just want to say that to begin with. But I've worked on records that took 2 years.
Yeah.
I think Peter Gabriel is an example of a great artist who may not have the song completely formed and uses the studio as a compositional arena.
Yeah.
We were afforded the luxury of metronomic time working with Peter, because he cut everything to a beatbox, and then we added the drums and the bass after the songs were built. But Peter didn't have everything available compositionally when we started. You know, it's along the way we'd find something that we love and say, okay, well, let that be part of the composition. Sometimes it'd be a bass line, other times it'd be something as simple, you know, basis of Sledgehammer. That's a track we had a lot of fun with because it was not a formed song yet. David Rhodes, great guitar player, works with Peter, myself on guitar and Peter, and then we just jammed this thing out, you know, and DR, David Rhodes, and I came up with this it's just this little engine or this little percolator going on underneath, and they're not the star attraction, but they are important to the groove and the tapestry. So sometimes groove and tapestry will provide a platform for the big melody to come. You have to be patient.
Would there be sections of songs that would go unfinished? Like for example, with Peter Gabriel, that you'd have the verse and the chorus done and then he would have no lyrics for the bridge or something like that, and this would go on for long periods of time. Would you ever have empty sections that you'd be thinking, what is going to go there?
There's always empty sections in production, of course. What we've had good luck with is if you're on a metronomic time journey, then make it longer than the song need be, leaving room at the back end for improv stuff and jamming. So the song's finished, let's have some fun. And the Sledgehammer became that. At the end, there was a little bit, the song's done, we'll get it right. Kick the habit, shed the skin, let's go out dancing to the new thing. So Peter just went off and went into improv lyrically. And we were able to take those improvs and bring them to earlier points in the song to help build the arrangement and the journey. So if we hadn't had that looseness and that fun patch to work with, we wouldn't have quite had the same song. I'm just saying this as a reminder to myself about keeping that technique going. Just have another 4 or 5 minutes at the back end of the song so people can have a little bit of fun, stretch, and not have to be worried about the bends in the road of an already written arrangement.
Are there records where you would mix particular sections and then edit the mix down together and say, let's say you have a verse mix and then you put in a chorus and then you do that, but you actually do it on the 2 mix and you edit a song together? Or would you typically mix an entire song and get it? I mean, is there anything that comes to mind that was done that way?
Well, as a young record maker, we didn't have anything called a recall system.
Yeah.
It didn't exist. And so in mixing, I might get a great intro on the one mix and a great body on another one, and the outro was magic on an earlier mix. And you're right, Rick, we just chopped these together, so best foot forward.
Yeah.
Or great mix, terrible fade, no problem. Let's do another fade and we'll glue it together with...
So that happened very often, right?
All the time.
All the time.
And still happens now.
Okay. How would some of these records that you've done as a producer or as a solo artist, how would they be different if you had Pro Tools or some type of DAW where you could have fixed things and edited drum tracks together?
Well, we're using a Canadian system called Radar.
Yep.
And it has what all modern recorders have. You can, if you make a mistake, you can undo.
Right.
Imagine life without the undo button.
Now, right? Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't recommend it, but it was certainly a good process of education, you know. You don't want to screw up the punch, because if you screw it up, you're out of a job.
Okay, explain that to people that don't know what a punch is.
A punch is...
you're on an analog tape machine, let's say a 2-inch machine, and you're
going
need to fix a
along
part.
and you've done a pretty good vocal, and you might say, but I think the second line of that chorus could be better, don't you? And everybody agrees. So you drop in to improve the second line. But you don't want to screw it up, because if you erase the line before and after, then you look like a bum.
Yeah. And timing, you have to be really good to do this, to actually punch in and punch out.
That's right.
Right?
Because you can't punch on the beat if there's a breath leading to the downbeat. So you're going to anticipate what will run into the downbeat. And it's, in my case, because I'm musical, that helped.
Yeah, right. Having good rhythm is important for these.
Yeah, knowing that, okay,
things.
well, we're going to punch on 4 and, not on 4, not on 1, it's on 4 and. Don't get me started, you know. I feel bad for engineers. Some engineers are great at their job, but are not musical, and they can't help it.
Right.
But they might not be able to speak the language of a horn player, you know.
Okay, so how important were music lessons to you? I know you took music lessons as a kid.
I loved my music lessons. They were very important to me. I started when I was 9, and I was a penny whistle player.
Okay.
This was the days of door-to-door canvassing, and somebody knocked on my mother's door, and he said, I'm representing a music school, and you got any kids that want to play music? She said, well, this one here plays the penny whistle. And I passed the aptitude test. Okay, we teach accordion or slide guitar. I took slide, and I loved it, walked to my lesson once a week. And what was cool about it was a one-on-one lesson. And what was cool about this guy, he'd say, close the door and say, okay. He said, now sit down there, I'm going to hypnotize you. And you're going to get better and better and better. I said, okay. And he put the center disc of a 45 on the music stand and said, you look at that, and don't take your eyes off it. And everything started getting fuzzy, and he said, you're going to get better. He had this whole little routine about me getting better. And he was right. I kept getting better and better.
Now, was that so that you wouldn't look at what you were playing, or why did
I
you do that?
don't know. He was just interested in hypnotism.
Okay.
And it was just his thing. And it was probably, a guy like that would be arrested now.
Exactly.
You're hypnotizing my kid.
Right.
I loved it. I couldn't wait to be hypnotized.
That's amazing.
But all that silliness aside, it's what was cool about playing slide guitar is I was just playing melody.
Yeah.
So things like Red River Valley, ding, 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 ding. And my teacher strummed the chords. So I was playing melody on my slide guitar, playing melody on my penny whistle. I remember the melodies from my grandfather playing the violin. It was all melodies, melodies, melodies for me for the longest time. And so the music, those early music lessons were very valuable for me to continue with what I was already inclined to do, melody. And to this day, I'm good with melody. And if you're good with melody, then you get to be good with harmony, and on and on and on.
So how important is taste being a producer or being a musician in general? Isn't taste everything? Don't people hire you as a producer because of your taste? Like, this is a good part, this is a good part, this is a bad part, this is a great sound. Nah, I'm not feeling that performance. I mean, ultimately, isn't taste the most important thing?
Well, you want to be philosophically aligned with folks you're working with, for sure. And I'm working with a great kid right now, Micah Nelson. He's part of the Willie Nelson family. And he has great taste. And he knows things that I don't know. We hang around, we laugh. Well, what about this? Well, oh, that reminds me of, we just cut a track last week. It's got the boom, boom, boom. I said, oh, we got to that place where we touched on a couple of favorite songs of mine. Working on a coal mine out of New Orleans. And then a little bit of, you put the lime in the coconut and drink the bowl. So we got to that place, and I was so happy that we got there because it's really rhythmically connected and it makes you want to dance. And so now we have this dancey platform for quite an inventive lyric. If I talk to Micah and I reference coal mine and lime in the coconut, he knows what I'm talking about because he's a smart kid. So we are aligned, at least on that, with taste. So getting back to what you're saying, you don't want to be a bull in a china shop and tell people what to do. You want to be working with people who you feel aligned with, and then the decisions get made on their own.
How much negotiation is there, though, when you're making a record, as far as if you think that something should be a certain way and the artist disagrees with you, how do you resolve that?
Well, we try and not have disagreements. If somebody wants to chase an idea in the studio, it's best to say, great, let's give it a try. Or that sounds great, let's go. And you might spend an hour or a day or 2 days on something, and then a mix happens, and a little bit of time goes by, and people are objective, and they say, okay, well, maybe it didn't work out quite as well as I thought. Because if you just tell no to somebody on an idea, then you might have an enemy on your hands. Well, you saw me in the kitchen, Rick. I said yes to everything, didn't I? You want to laugh on this side? Yes.
How important is psychology, though, being a producer working with artists?
I think psychology is, once you get past your talent and your skills and your dreams and all that, I think psychology is everything. We joked about it in the kitchen, how somebody might study debate for 5 years in university. That's fine. But I've studied how to get along with people and how to get things done in those 5 years. And what would we call that? Is there a department that teaches cooperation, productivity, agreement, working together in such a way that you get to a better place collectively? These are the big lessons for me. And I've learned from some of the best, including Brian Eno.
How do you start a record? What's the first thing you do when you're working with an artist?
We start a record by having a conversation about where things could go to. Everybody wants to get to that special place where the music is unique and has soul and a reason to exist. Once some kind of a rapport has come into play, then I do my preparations. So before Neil Young arrived in this beautiful room, I spent about a week with the folks I was working with at the time, building the sounds, so that when Neil walked in, we weren't having to pull things out of the
Now,
closet.
would Neil, I didn't mean to interrupt, but would Neil have demos that you had heard of the songs already?
In
Or
the
would he
case
have
of
played
Neil,
them
in case
for
of
you?
Neil, I hadn't heard a note.
Okay. All right.
But he clarified that he wanted to record 10 acoustic songs.
Okay.
And would I film him, because we were making films
Oh, yeah.
at the time. So he liked the films we were making because they were a one camera shoot and moving with the song. And so we, by lens, let's say, we do the same thing with sound. We want to make sure that all the details and the journey of the song are properly represented by sound. I just rolled the dice. I got a call from him because Elliot Roberts was managing the both of us. And I said, I always wanted to make a record with Neil. And then I got a call from Neil. I wonder how that happened. We had a great time because we're both Canadian, so some of the humor was similar. And I mean, Neil's a generation ahead of me, but we're cut from a similar cloth. I happen to have a lot of lovely vintage equipment, like beautiful old Fender Tweed amps.
Mm-hmm.
And I had pulled some of them out so you can see them. And I have service tags on them. The date that it was serviced, the personality, the type of speaker, the tube replacement, everything was on the service tag. He looked at it and says, I love service tags. I knew there was something about you. So that's how the relationship started. We were good with service tags.
So would Neil then play you a song if you were gonna, would he sit here and say, oh, here's this idea I have,
Yeah.
or would he have completed songs, or would he say, I've got most of this one, I need to work on the lyrics? Where would you be on that particular record, for example?
Some of the songs were already fully composed. I handed him my little Guild acoustic, a little all mahogany Guild acoustic that we got a nice sound with. And he played it and he heard it. He said, that's amazing. He kept his own guitar in the case. He said, can I play this one? I said, sure. So he was very moved by the amount of prep that we'd put into the sounds prior to his arrival. And so he played that little acoustic and just fell in love with the room and everything. We set up his pipe organ in the corner. We talked about pipe organs.
Yeah.
And he felt right at home and realized that there was something cooking in the house. And all the preparations had been dealt with. That's one hell of a way to make somebody feel like a somebody. You care about what they're doing. I care about myself, but I care more about the people I'm working with when I'm working with them. Then they can feel that. So that feeling of commitment and love, TLC, all these things, they add up to building confidence and a nice rapport with somebody. And taste comes into play. That's the advantage to having done something in a home environment or an exotic location environment.
When you're in a studio, like how do you decide where you're gonna record? You owned your own studio, you go and work someplace remotely. Are there places where you think to yourself, man, I really don't like this isn't the right vibe, I don't think we can get the sounds that we need to get? Or do you think about these things before you even, like when you went over to work with U2 in Ireland, for example?
When I first went to Ireland to work with U2, they wanted to record in an unusual location. They didn't want to be in the conventional recording studio anymore. They wanted to be in a place that had historical significance. And they chose Slane Castle,
Right.
in Slane, right where the Battle of the Boyne had been fought. Mm-hmm. And that was the defining battle that allowed the Brits to take over Ireland. So it's a heavy place. And so we set up the studio in that location. I luckily had recent experience back in Hamilton because I was getting tired of my own studio, and the city moved the city library, the old Hamilton library, to a new building. And so the old building, a beautiful building, was made available to me because I knew somebody in the city. And so I made records in this old library. And funny hallways, the mezzanine, try a mic in the bathroom, all this kind of, and suddenly I had access to all kind of sounds that I never had in my padded studio. So when the invitation came to work in Ireland with the guys in a castle, I already had a bit of experience, doing things that way. So they appreciated that I was excited about their idea, and I was able to do something about it. And then I guess it was a combination of all that experience, and then Eno and I brought in this whole bag of new sonic tricks that we had developed in Hamilton.
There's films of that recording session, and I remember seeing Bono in a huge room with maybe a C12 or something on him, a condenser mic though, with tons of ambient room sound. Now, when you're dealing with that, is that an issue in recording a vocal like that?
Yeah. Well, the room you're speaking of was the grand ballroom of the castle, and it was a beautiful room. But I got to be honest with you, most of the record was done in another room. It was done in the library, which was lined with books.
Yeah.
And
great diffusers.
That was a great lesson for me for soundproofing. If ever you want to deaden a room down, you haven't got a lot of money, just get old encyclopedias and National Geographics and line them up. We did some recording in that big, beautiful ballroom, but in the end it was too reverberant, and we ended up going into the dense library, and that was better for sound. The C12 might have been a bit of a romantic notion. I think we get best results with...
Was it like a 58, or what would Bono use typically?
Usually just a Beta 58.
Yeah.
Yeah, over the years we just keep a 58 on the couch.
And he would just hold it, right, and sing?
Yeah. Most times we're in the control room on a couch, and you know, the track's running, and I said, well, what about da 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 da? So right away, you don't have to go to another room.
Yeah.
So you can take advantage of. We always keep a control room setup going. So mic is only a foot away, and off we go with it. So if somebody has even Edge, if he has a quick guitar idea, we have an in the control room guitar rig ready to go. He doesn't have to go in another room.
So that expediency is really important.
Momentum.
Right? To never stop the flow of ideas.
Never say no.
Yeah. Doesn't matter if the speakers are on or anything for a vocal take, right?
No,
as long
doesn't
as
matter.
With a Beta 58, if the speakers are coming towards you, I mean, you get a little bit of bleed in there, but not that much.
Not that much. And he's such a great singer that you want to get that moment. You don't want to say, oh, hang on, let's plug something in. No. We're already plugged in.
Is Bono a loud singer? Does he have a loud voice?
He has a beautiful print, we call it. The microphone loves his voice. Emmylou Harris has a great print. Willie Nelson. Beautiful voices, and the microphone loves them.
How important is that? That's really important, right?
Yes. Well, it comes down to signal to noise.
Yeah.
And we use Roy Orbison as a point of reference of somebody who sang quietly, but he just, pretty woman, what a love sweet. He's not belting in the room, oh, look at me, pretty woman. So that sort of the Elvis zone, so the microphone likes low mids. And so that becomes your floor, let's say, for your signal to noise ratio. So if you've got that beautiful low mid in your voice, then it will hide the distractions away. So you won't get the fizzly disturbances in the room. And so the best singers have that little zone in their voice, as Emmylou does.
Yeah.
See what you lost when you left this world. The tones blossom, and the microphone just loves it. And you get that. They are their own noise gate. They leave out the noise. That's how beautiful they are.
How do you deal with songs, though, that have really radical changes in volume, like a song like With or Without You, where you have a very low part in the verses, and then you have loud choruses? Now, do you ride the fader on the voice? Do you punch in the louder sections and reset the levels typically? In
the case of what you just talked about, soft singing in a lower register, and then eventually it goes up an octave. And, I use this little device called Teletronics LA2A.
Yes.
It's a compressor, and it has two knobs on it. The one is how much you're going to compress, and the other knob is what you're sending to tape. So I keep my hand on that knob. For the quiet bit, I do this, and for the loud bit, I do that.
So you just ride it during the performance, right? You know when he's going to go,
ride it during
get
the
loud.
Performance, yeah. That way you don't have to use so much compression. It's called human compression.
And the LA2A, they sound great on bass. They sound great on acoustic guitar. Do you like using that for certain instruments, or what do you use on your acoustic guitar? Because your acoustic guitar sounds are beautiful. Do you like using compression when you're recording acoustic guitar?
We use a similar chain for most things. Choose a microphone that we love, and then I generally use API preamps or my old Neve preamps. I have some beautiful Neves from the 70s, these big 4 bands like I used on Bob Dylan. And then we hit an LA2A after that, and that's usually it. That's the chain.
Talk about the LA2A, about why that. It's a tube. It's an optical tube compressor.
Yes.
Very warm.
There's something about optics. I have some volume pedals made by Morley, and that's an optic sensor as well. So there's no potentiometer in the chain. It's the volume is being adjusted by light.
Yeah.
So there's a certain kind of fluidity to that technology. Now, I didn't invent this stuff, so I can't tell you exactly how it works, but I do know that the LA2A and the Morley volume pedal, to use 2 examples, they're very, very smooth. There's nothing harsh about them. And so they're quite musical and a nice complement to a human voice or a trombone or anything that has that beautiful body, that low mid bass. Then the tube compressors, the LA2A, to use one specific, reference a specific one, they have that and they're kind to those sounds. You may there might be a more brittle sound application that wouldn't have anything to do with that gear. And I have a little Shure mixer. It's 8-to-1, so it just has one output. So if I'm miking a complex percussion setup, I just send it all to that one thing, so I just get one cable in the end.
Oh, that's awesome. When you listen back to old records that you've done, do you ever think, wow, I really nailed it here? Or do you think, are there moments when you're like, that part always just gets me, there's something about, do you forget over time the things that you didn't like about it?
Well, isn't it nice to hear an old record that one has worked on and think, that's pretty good? And I think that about a lot of the old records I've made because I was in a zone. And what I think is I could never be in that zone again. That zone we got to that zone with those people in that location at that time. We were philosophically aligned. We came up with something that belonged to us then. And that's how the term came into existence. It's a record.
Right.
It's a record of something that was happening at a given time. Do I think records could have been done differently when I hear them? I don't usually think
You don't think that way, right?
No. I'm just happy that we got to a place, a soulful place. The only thing that makes me sad is if I was lucky enough to make some kind of a masterpiece with an artist, and then they go on and make a lesser record next time around that I wasn't involved with, I want to find where people live.
Do you ever talk to the artists afterwards if they've made a record like that and tell them what you think?
I've had some repeat customers with tail between their legs. Well, I know it's been 10 years, Lanois, but what do you think? You got another one? Yeah, sure, no problem.
You had so many of these. I mean, I think about the Robbie Robertson record. You did the Peter Gabriel So. You did the Joshua Tree. I mean, all of these records were right
back
to back.
Yeah.
What is that like? Do you ever get burned out during that time period, or you just were in it? And some of these records took a long time to make, right?
Yeah. Getting burnt out. Yeah, that happens just from sitting in that chair a long time.
Right.
I wish there was a reset button that could be pushed for objectivity. But we rely on people around us. People stop in, they sit on the couch, they respond to something, and so, ooh, maybe that's a good thing. So we're used to reading other people in regards to how the work is going. The only solution to burning out is really make sure we have rough mixes all the way along. And then at the end of a given week, we'd have rough mixes of what happened during the week, and then we have the unexpected tape or CD or whatever we were listening to at the time that had all the forgotten moments of the week. And that's where it gets interesting, because the forgotten moments might be star attractions. And so we put the labor into what we think we should be doing, but then some of these little delights, unexpected delights for the following week might become the seeds to yet another composition or more, several compositions.
Well, we talked about when we were having coffee about Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, that the drum beat, which is a really odd but super cool drum beat, was part of another song.
Yeah.
Right? Was that something that was on a cassette that you said, we should revisit that, or did, and then build another song off it?
It came out of a jam, a fun jam, and Larry came up with that amazing drum beat. And it was fully isolated because everyone else was in a booth. And I loved that drum beat, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste.
I mean, it's really unique. I've never heard a drum beat like that.
Yeah, it's got a sort of a bonk, donk, gunk, boom, donk, gonk, something like that.
Right.
It's so strange.
It is so strange. For a song that is so known all over, you know, that I can't imagine not knowing that song. But that drum part, when I think about it, you just kind of take it for granted. You hear the song and it just works so well. But when you actually listen to the drum part, it's like, hey, what?
Don't we just love the unusual when it's good? Yeah, that drum part of Larry's, it was haunting me. And I thought, that's got to get on the record somehow. I just kept fishing it out. Try it on this drum beat.
I want to actually, let me play that actually. I want to play that. He goes dun, 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 dun. At the end of the phrase. He does all those kicks in a row, and it's so odd, and it's so grooving. It's so unique. Dun, 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 and then back into it.
But you made no mention of the great tambourine part now, Rick.
That's you, right? You do all the percussion on this, right? On this record, a lot of most of the percussion is you playing, isn't it?
I just like keeping Larry company, so he wasn't by himself in the drum department. I was always either on tambourine or shakers. And, yeah.
When I hear that, though, I just think about that beat. I think most people never even think about that, but that is an incredibly original drum beat.
Yes. Well, what can we say? The drum beat always had the magic, and so I fished it out of the closet for that reason, that the magic might then.
And then did you just build the track around it?
Yeah,
Did
then
the
the
guys
next
come
thing
up?
that went on was Edge laid down an acoustic guitar.
Okay.
Jan, jan, jigga, 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 jan. Essentially a 3-chord song.
Yeah.
It just went from there.
And how does Bono just improvise vocals typically over that?
Yeah,
then?
it was. That particular one started out as an improv. We thought it was the most R&B thing we had done, and so I said, well, think of it like you're a soul singer. You know, what would you sing? I mean, he's a powerhouse singer. I hadn't heard it in a while. When you played it just now, oh my goodness, all these images came back of the location, and we were in this beautiful house in the country. A room about this size was the band room, with a big old wide plank floor, like a farmhouse floor, and everything sounded fantastic and rock and roll and loud in that room.
I've never seen any photographs from that recording session. Are there any photos from the Joshua Tree?
You know, in those days we weren't running cameras.
Yeah.
And I wish we had, you know.
I mean, there's literally, I've never seen a still photograph of that recording session.
Isn't that funny in those days? Or what about the Peter Gabriel sessions? We wouldn't have a camera on for that?
Right.
But people didn't have cameras in those days, Rick.
Speaking of Peter Gabriel, you get to work on all these records. This is beautiful. It's amazing. When you listen to that, what do you think?
Then I'm a lucky duck.
If you'd like to see more long-form interviews like this, please consider becoming a member of the Beato Club. That's the way I pay for the travel, hiring the film crews, and making these things available to you without having to get outside sponsors. The link for the Beato Club is in the description below. That is absolutely, everything about that is beautiful. The groove, the vocal, the melody, the ambience, the punch. I mean, the motion in the vocal, it kills me when I hear that.
Well, that one was a long journey. I mean, we could talk about sounds. And
talk about sounds.
This Red Rain, the song, as it evolves, towards the end, it starts sounding like rain.
Yeah.
Red Rain. All these colliding sonics that become atmospheric. And I don't mean just things to be ambient and textural and, no, atmospheric. It takes you to a location. I think that's probably a better use of the word. If the sounds take you to a place and you imagine, oh, there's actually a scene here, there's a setting, there's a storyline, and I'm in that place that these people designed. So Red Rain is an example of that. And we got to that by using the old Brian Eno process that I talked to you about earlier, that the sounds, the special effects come back from the special effects boxes and then get printed onto the multi-track, and I get to process them again, so that it goes, what might be dong becomes dong. So you got to be a regeneration of fifths to add to the fundamental of the note. You can't leave these special effects on all the time because you're going to bump into train wrecks. Because you know, the one chord, a semitone into the next, and you got a train wreck. So you have to keep punching in your special effects. So
have a performance of those things, and you make it a part.
You make it a part, exactly. It becomes a musical part. It's not just, let's put some reverb on, like a flower arrangement. No, the reverb won't make sense on the semitone change. So you have to print the first part of it, stop, cue up on the next note, play that note, print that, and so on. So that's why the effects that you're hearing are musical. It's not just a reverberant room. Nothing wrong with that, but it might not work. In my case, it never works.
Peter's voice sounds incredible on that. He's such a great singer. When you're listening to this, back when you recorded it and you're listening in the studio, do you realize how great these songs are?
Well, I realize what a great performance is from Peter, and no headphones.
Okay.
Is a start.
Okay.
And he had his Yamaha CP70 piano and a little blaster. I forget what kind it was, just a Sansui or something like that. He was singing to his blaster all the time.
Okay.
And then I found most of the vocals were done with a U47, which is an old German tube mic, which is quite a challenge in itself because you don't want the sound from the blaster to enter the vocal track more than necessary.
Okay, so what do you do?
Just find the sweet spot,
Yep.
and have it be that. Sometimes we put the left side out of phase with the right, so you get this
So it cancels each
cancellation.
other out.
Yeah, we played that game a little bit, but it was really about. I just wanted to make sure that Peter didn't have to leave his station to do vocals. He was always in the same spot doing the vocals.
Would he sit down to do these?
Not necessarily. Well, he was sitting down because it was a piano station.
Yeah.
But sometimes he'd stand up.
Yeah.
And we just adjust the microphone. But I didn't take him out of his natural environment. I didn't say, okay, Peter, now you got to go in a booth to do this. No, everything was done in that spot where he was inspired to sing in a certain way. Because in the end, performance is everything. So we wanted to make sure we captured that. Let's move on to bass. When I hear the bass on this, tone 11 on the bass.
Yes.
We'd gotten this brand new SSL console, one of the first models they put out, and every channel had a dynamic section, you know, a little compression and sound expansion. I just turned every knob up to 10.
Okay.
And it made it so that he hit a note. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that became the basis of the bass sound for that record. So it compressed, expanded, and gated. And I'm reminded of it when you played it. I thought, oh, that's what we were doing at that time. So it had a lot to do with that generation of an SSL.
Was that an E series, you think, at the time, or a G series? Who knows, right?
I forget what series it was, but it was the first generation.
That had the compressors and the gates on them and everything. And
Yeah, and we just kind of went up the wazoo with it, and all right, Tony, give me what you got. And I just kind of really go the craziest sound I could come up with the craziest EQ.
Did you realize, though, how great these songs sounded at the time? Or do you just not even think about that? You just make them sound as great as they can sound. But I mean, listening back, these are just beautiful, rich, powerful.
We get excited about a certain sound, and we make sure that we have it, we record it at its optimum.
Yeah.
And then we move on to something else. So we never leave anything in a terrible sonic state. You know, if it doesn't get there, then we don't bother with it. So it's a snowball effect. If you do one thing very well, then it promotes something else done very well, and so on. So all of the overdubs along the way happen for a reason. They happen because they were inspired by something that already exists. So you don't end up with a bunch of stuff on your multi-track that doesn't relate, you know.
What are you playing on this? Are you playing on this song? Yes.
Yeah, I'm playing guitar, I think, on this one. Usually just little low frequency parts. There's another one on the record called In Your Eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And were you going to cue it up there, Rick?
Cue it up, yeah.
I get so lost sometimes. Days pass,
Let it run to the chorus.
Yeah.
That's the part I want to talk
and
about.
this emptiness fills my heart. When I want to run away, I drive off in my car. But whichever way I go, I come back to the place you are. All my instincts
Okay, so you play that riff that is the hook of the chorus, really.
I played it's a 12-string. Peter had an electric 12-string around the studio, a very tinny sounding instrument, not a very nice instrument. It occupies that range, you know, so it's a little part. I played that part with DR, David Rhodes, and it became, let's call it a second line.
Yeah.
Which is a New Orleans term for a support role that the drum might play. But in this case, the support line was such that it was a high frequency, harmonic, high speed component underneath a relatively low, slow phrasing from the vocal.
Yeah.
So these two, they're lovely companions.
It propels the chorus there.
It really does.
It really does. What's so interesting about this song is that, first of all, the shape of the melody in the chorus is amazing. I love the different, the melody just goes in really unexpected things. Perfect.
All my instincts, they return. The grand facade, so soon will
I love the space in the melody.
without a noise,
And then,
without my pride, I reach out from the inside.
what is that right there?
Vocals.
In your arms.
Vocals through.
Sometimes we go into diversions, you know, let's get off the lyric hook and just do some textures.
Yeah.
And that was one of those, I think Peter did a few vocal overdubs that were non-lyric, and I took them and created a harmonic tapestry behind the lead vocal.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful. It just creates that, it has its own thing that happens right there where there's space. There's actually so much space in the vocal melody in the chorus, just such natural phrases in the melody. And then it has this post-chorus part before it goes into the verse. It's really an odd form, right? Because this next section
The light, the heat,
is like an extension of the chorus.
complete. See the doorway, the thousand churches, the resolution of all the fruitless searches. Oh, I see the light and the heat. Oh, I wanna be that complete. I wanna touch the light, the heat I see in your eyes.
I mean, that is such an odd form, really, when you think about it.
I'd forgotten about the background vocals. In your eyes. I think I'm singing that with DR.
You did a lot of singing on a lot of these records, right? You do a lot of background singing.
Background singing, yeah.
Yeah. And you're such a great singer.
I'm okay.
No, you're a great singer.
I'm a good part singer.
I mean, you're such a good instrumentalist on multiple, I mean, all different instruments. You're a fantastic pedal steel player, the hardest instrument, as we talked about, the hardest instrument. I mean, really, what is harder to play than a pedal steel?
Any instrument that doesn't have fixed notes are hard to play.
Yes.
A piano, I mean, I'm not saying piano is easy, but you can plunk a melody on a piano and a key will have a certain pitch.
Right.
Whereas on a steel guitar, you have a metal bar, so you have to be using your ears all the time. All string instruments, you know, violins, violas, cellos are hard to play that way because you're constantly chasing pitch. If you're looking for fast and furious, I wouldn't recommend the pedal steel guitar.
Right. I want to talk about something we talked about earlier today about folk music and the melodies that, or what folk music is.
Yeah. Well, normally we term folk music a applies to something, done on an acoustic guitar and maybe a little storytelling song. But I believe that the term could be used in a much broader fashion. What we talked about in the kitchen is I might hear my grandfather playing something that I like melodically, and I learn it, and I play it at the bar, and I meet a girl, we play it at her house, she plays it for the ex-boyfriend, and next thing you know, what was perhaps a little isolated melody that belonged to a certain house or region becomes more public, and it's passed on through folk. So it's got a little Chinese whisper in it. Somebody tells a little story and hear it again, and then it gets enhanced over time. So folk music could apply to acoustic music, as it did in my case. My grandfather was a violoneux. But it can also be that we hear a riff in modern times. We hear a riff, or we hear something, and maybe it's sampled from something else, and so it never stops. So the folk music is really just about people and music. You sing something, I sing it to Pavel, Pavel sings it to Gord, and so on, and next thing you know, that tune has traveled through several communities. So that's really the meaning of folk music. It's just people and music and repeating things.
We talked also about music from Louisiana, from New Orleans, music from the French communities where you grew up in Canada, and kind of the similarities between those. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, of course, the New Brunswick music culture. New Brunswick is a province in Canada, just above Vermont. So that pocket of culture is a very ancient culture. And when the Brits were at war with the French lost to the Brits. And the ones who were not prepared to be loyal to whoever was running the show at the time, the Queen or the King, they were put on a boat and sent off to float in the Atlantic. And they thought, where the hell are we gonna go? So they went down to Louisiana, which was the closest French colony. Mm-hmm. And the mythology of it being, they never found New Orleans. They just kept going west, and they went to Lafayette. So to this day, the Cajun community of Lafayette is the old Acadian. It started as, the word started as Acadian, then became Acadian and Cajun. And so the music, the violin and the piano and the accordion music that we hear in the Lafayette area originally came from Canada, from Acadie. They were Acadiens.
And you had a studio in New Orleans years ago.
Yes.
Tell me about that. Why did you go down there? Do you feel a natural connection with that part of the country?
I went to New Orleans for two reasons. I fell in love with the architecture, mm-hmm. and I fell in love with the music. But I already knew about that because as a kid, I came up listening to some of the greats from that area. Fats Domino, Blueberry Hill, all the little Richard hits. And so this was a very, very potent musical region. And as a record listener as a kid, I thought, oh my goodness, we never had anything like that up in Canada. So one day I might get to go south and be in the environment where this music was invented. So that's why I went down. And somebody put two and two together. Lanois down there, and so are the Neville brothers, so let's make a record.
We spoke about this a little earlier about the musical influences. So I was born in '62, you were born in '51, but people of the generation that created rock and roll were born before us.
Yes.
And their influences, if you think about Chuck Berry or, what did they hear before? What did the Beatles hear before that, if John Lennon was born in 1940, the music that they heard as kids was big band music.
Yeah.
Think about the music you heard on the radio, whereas you heard early rock and roll. Do you think that as we get further away from that, there's this disconnect between maybe today's culture where they don't know that music anymore because they're so far away from that? What do you think about that?
The early discoveries of the early unfoldings, let's call them, mm-hmm. The coming of rock and roll, the big band era, bumping into small combo jazz, everything that we just touched on, they were at the front end of a medium, let's say. They were at the front end. Rock and roll had never existed before the 50s, so they were inventing something. Psychedelic music from the 60s, that was an invention.
Yeah.
Miles Davis going electric and making bitches brew, that was an invention. Yes, we had influences back then, but then new approaches were invented. Okay, as you move ahead, it gets harder and harder to invent a brand new thing because you're using some of the old toolboxes. And so we're not suggesting that a bullet microphone had never been used before. In the 40s and 50s, a harmonica player picked this up.
That's right.
So we needed to be a little louder, and that was the only mic available, and let's plug it into this little PA or an amp. And now they were using a high impedance piece of equipment to enhance the harmonica. So that was the beginning of a new sound. It gets harder and harder to come up with new things because we have so much greatness from the past to reference. On the upside, we did invent the sampling.
Yeah.
In modern times. So people said, not only were those records that great, we can actually take a little piece and build a new song around it. So I'm a supporter of the modern day collage system. Maybe in those days people haven't heard too much and they invented something out of being limited, have a limited toolbox. But in modern times we have everything. So sampling, I think, is a cool thing. I'm a collage artist myself in modern times. I fish out some stuff that I did with Billy Bob Thornton back in the day, and I'm sticking it on this new Michael Nelson I'm working on. And nobody says anything because I don't have to talk to anyone other than the man in the mirror. I mean, I've strayed from your question there, Rick, but how are modern times different than back then? Well, I meet kids all the time that they only listen to old records because they're tired of the new shit that doesn't have any soul. Not all modern music is soulless, don't get me wrong. I love modern music. I love Rosalia from Spain. I think she's a beautiful singer. And I'll say it on camera, I'm hoping to work with Rosalia. Rosalia, give me a call. Let's work together.
When we were growing up, you basically had access to the radio and then records that you owned or your friends owned. But that was it. Or you go see live music. Okay, so it wasn't that you could take your phone and listen to anything that's on Spotify or Apple Music like you can now, where you can really experience. Mm-hmm. I can listen to every one of your solo records right now just by opening my phone.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the advantage and disadvantage of that? Like, what was the advantage growing up where you, like you said, Rick James came in and was like, whoa, what is that? What is he doing here? Eventually collecting your toolbox of things, of people that you work with, sounds that you're familiar with, different ways people do things. Can you talk about that?
We as humans, we fall in love with something and we cherish it. I have to assume that back in the day when I was a kid that the things that we loved and cherished, we held on to them a little bit longer and loved them even more. And we didn't move on to something else. So, I went out and bought a Safari's record when I was a kid. It had Wipeout on it. I kept listening to it and listening to it, listening to it. I didn't think, well, I've got 12,000 other albums. I mean, no, I just loved that one. I say that to people who are, they want to become musicians, and it's overwhelming because should I go to Juilliard or maybe this, maybe that? No, play 3 notes that you love. Let me hear them. Dum, dum, dum. Okay, play it again. Dum, dum, dum. Dum, ding, da, dum, ding, da, dum, ding, da, dum, ding, da, dum, ding, da. Your eyes, it may lead to that, but you have to be in love with something. What do you love? Who do you love? Loving 3 notes is a great start, and off we go. And never forget the 3 notes you fell in love with, because they may be useful to you along the way. I think we had 2 albums, 2 records in my mother's house, a Sarah Vaughan record, and I think it was a Sinatra record. And that's all we had. I had to go out and buy my own album, the Safaris. By not having a lot of records, I got to listen to Sarah Vaughan. My mom had bought a little console stereo, everything's in one box, you lift the lid and you put on the record. I just sat there and listened to that box for months and years, and I loved it. And it was luxurious sounding, had beautiful bass, And I tried to imagine how they even made this. That woman's voice, Sarah Vaughan, was so beautiful, and the orchestration, and I just kept wondering and wondering and wondering. And when you wonder, you ask questions, and you might have to answer them yourself.
Did your brother Bob, was his interest in recording, did he have this interest before you, or this kind of happened at the same time?
I had the interest before my brother Bob. In fact, I started the recording studio when he was in India. He went to India as a young man to study mantras and get into that world of holistics. Wow. And when he came back, I already had the studio going, and I said, I think we should do this. And he agreed, and he was always more technical than me and good with electronic design. So we were able to take full advantage of his skills as a technician. And I would explain to him what I'm trying to do, and he would build me the equipment as a response to my request. We were a great team that way.
When you guys opened your studio in Hamilton, was it Grant Street?
Yeah, Grant Avenue studio, yeah.
Grant Avenue. Mm-hmm. Did you just rent a building and then you got gear, and how did you start that exactly?
I bought a building. It was just a Victorian house with an extra lot. So the lot allowed us to park a good 20, 30 cars.
Okay.
And my brother transformed this regular Victorian house, a 3-story house, into the recording studio. It cost $70,000, and I had a mortgage at 17%. People complain about 5.
Wow.
Try 17.
Oh, man.
Renovated that house. I kept the studio going in my mom's basement while my brother was fixing up the new spot, and he designed a whole monitor system. A brilliant guy. And we soundproofed all the windows, and by pouring sand between 1-inch plywood, so what looks like, we kept the stained glass window, but the rest of it was filled up with sand, mm-hmm. and because sand is very dense, so
yeah.
we didn't have any.
You
wouldn't hear the garbage truck
yeah.
in my old studio, like you do here.
What was your mom's basement like, though? Was it just in a neighborhood, a suburban neighborhood?
My mom's basement was a regular bungalow house basement. There was nothing special about it. It had a pretty nice big backyard and front yard. I remember recording Jamaican bands, and they'd show up with an entourage of 40 people. So they'd just end up on the lawn, eating on picnic blankets. And my mother, she looked at all this and said, I don't know how you guys did this, but it's a lot of fun.
That is great. Your mom was really supportive, though.
My mom was just so happy that we'd found something we loved, and that we were excited about it and doing special things. And she just rolled her eyes at a certain point and said, okay, that's it.
When you became successful, how much did your mom enjoy that?
My mom could not believe the success that I had gotten to. She was my date at the Grammy Awards in Manhattan, Radio City Music Hall. The year that we got the Album of the Year award for Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind album. She was my date. I went up to the podium, there's a little commercial break. I said, Mom, come on with me, we'll go backstage. So she came backstage. We're sitting around I'm with Dylan, and Tony Bennett's at the table. I'm talking to Dylan about this and that and the other thing. I look over, Tony Bennett is rubbing my mother's feet. I said, hey, what's going on over here? She said, it's okay, it's Tony. My mom's sisters were very jealous that she came to Manhattan and hooked up with Tony. But anyhow, that was one of those moments that I thought,
that's so great.
What son gets to invite his mom backstage, and she gets to hang with Tony Bennett, who's a great star from her era,
I mean, to go from the basement to that is quite an accomplishment.
How does that happen, Rick?
Right.
Well, to repeat what was said earlier, we do the best we can. We try and do soulful work, and that gets noticed, and you get more phone calls. I wouldn't have met Eno if I hadn't done good work, or Peter Gabriel. We wouldn't have gone to Ireland to work with you two. It's just, Talent is one thing, but getting up in the morning and putting on your boots and doing something about it is another. This kind of steel town talk here, because I know you're from Rochester, and I grew up in Hamilton, and it was all about people taking lunch pails and going to work, or packing their lunches.
Packing their lunches.
At home. You wouldn't go to the fast food place for lunch, or you packed a lunch. So it says a certain kind of standard. And it was the same in my mother's house. There was always cooking going on in the kitchen, you know. Make sure you cook now so you have something for lunch later.
What would your typical work day be like? Would it be different with different artists? Like, would some artists like to work in the mornings, or would you set the schedule, or the artist set the schedule?
I've always been a morning worker, so I show up early, and then the people I'm working with will come in around 10:30 or 11-ish. That's usually the...
And how long would a typical work day be?
Usually all day, and then into the evening as well. And when we get tired, we'll make sure that the people have a morning to themselves.
And when you were working on tape, who would do would you do an alignments and cleaning the tape machines, all that stuff would get done before you even got there?
Well, I was cleaning the tape machine is something that I did all day myself.
Yeah.
You know, so you don't want oxide to be building up on your heads. You know, you got to work with the tech staff, you know, in regards to what you said, lining up machines and making sure that, in the case working with Peter Gabriel, we did some of that record in New York, so you make sure all your test tones are there, and then so you show up in a different studio, and then they line up the machine, optimized in the way that the sand patch that you started with. I guess there's always been some technological frustrations along the way. I'm not, I'm not such a, I really missed the old tape days. Cause if you saw pictures of me editing in Peter Gabriel's room, I'm waist deep in 2-inch tape, like the whole room is full of tape. And I got to remember what all this stuff is.
So would you cut out things if there were, if somebody dragged on something, would you go and cut a little piece out of the tape of a drum take? Yes, right?
What I did with tape, with drum replacements, obviously long before computerized digital recording, I would take, make a copy. In regards to Peter, we're all on rhythm box time.
Yep.
So I would make a copy of the drums, and if there's a bar that was fantastic and could replace a problem bar, I just put a mark on the head, a chalk mark, and then, okay, don't. So I'd do a drop and overdub of a bar and put it back into the mothership.
Wow.
It's
insane when you think about it.
It's insane when you think about it, but we didn't have looping.
Right.
Or anything like that. No, it was just, everything had to be done by hand. And if you screwed it up, you were out the door.
And then, and you had to really keep track of these things. I mean, mentally, like, okay, this is a good, or something might be going by, right? And you'd be like, I don't, that one bar feels weird. Mm-hmm. Is there another spot that we can use it from? Now with Pro Tools or with whatever, or Radar, whatever you're using, you can move things around easily. But
that's right, yeah.
You just make mental notes where you just have a notebook. Oh, we're going to take this bar from this section and move it here.
You want to talk notebooks now? Oh my goodness.
You get a lot of notebooks.
A lot of notebooks. And people ask me, what's the notebook all about? I say, it's simple. You hear something you like, make a note of it.
When you do vocals, would you have a checklist of lines that you would do, or?
Yes, I have the lyric sheet, and if you do half a dozen takes, you have to remember where the best lines live. And I do most of that work in privacy, so I'm not wearing people out. I do my vocal comps. It was always a nice part of my relationship with Eno, because he didn't like to spend that kind of time on that stuff, but I didn't mind, because all the breathing points and all the EQ matching, and even sometimes a vocal from a rehearsal from somewhere where
you'd have a good line or whatever.
There was just a high note that was hit. I did it with Neil Young. He was rehearsing at the Wiltern. I was missing a note from the record here. I went to hear the rehearsal. He was pegging the note. I said, make sure you record that. And I took that and brought it back and stuck it in. I mean,
do what you have to do, right?
Do what you have to do to look after people.
Would you make a comp track though? You take, if you had 6 tracks and then you punch them all, you'd just switch the channels.
Yeah, do all the comping.
And put it on one track. Then.
Yeah, put it all on one track, definitely. Still doing that these days.
Would you compress the vocal when you went in, and would you compress it again later on mixdown, typically, or not?
I like to compress on the recording, and then we use program compression on the mix. But I won't compress something twice. If I've done it on the vocal initially, then program compression, yes, but I wouldn't go back and compress again.
I want to ask you about bus compression too when you're mixing. What would you use typically? Would you use a bus compressor? Would you hit it hard? Tell me about that. Would you EQ the mix as it's going down?
I had a nice experience in recent times because I wrote a bunch of songs for this video game called Red Dead Redemption.
Oh yeah.
Everybody knows about video games, but you can, in the case of this one, like all video games, you can decide as a player, you can decide where your central character is going to go. So you can, let's go to open world rather than the saloon and so on. What Rockstar Games wanted was stems, so I believe it's 5 stems per title, let's say. So the one stem would just be drums and percussion, and there's a bass line and this, and then something else, and a harmony. So whatever it might be for the specifics of that title. So if you're going along and you decide to go open world rather than the saloon, maybe there you just hear the you don't hear boom, 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 boom underneath. So the stems way of mixing, getting back to what you're asking about, yes, I really enjoy the process of stems mixing because I could really optimize the details of that sound without thinking about the rest of the mix.
Right.
Pushing and pulling, adding a little spin echo, this and that and the other thing. So that stem now has its own life and its own mix. And then we do the same thing to the next stem. And what was a nice surprise to me is when I put up all the faders at 0, I heard a very, very good mix. I had never worked that way before.
Interesting.
And I thought, okay, I found something fresh for myself. So I highly recommend the technique, as if I'm the only one thinking about it, but to put all of the intention, it's just a variation on the theme of doing a great comp.
Yeah.
Make sure every breath is correct. That syllable's a little too loud, pull it down, and then exaggerate it on the resolve. All these little things. You don't have to wait for mixing day to get all that right. You get them along the way.
Would you ever, when you're mixing a song, ride the fader in the choruses, the master bus, to make it louder? Do you do things like that? Would you do things like that on some of these records that we listen to?
I wouldn't ride the master fader.
Okay.
But I would ride everything else to the compressor. So I might pull something down and bring the drums up for a certain portion of the arrangement. Yes, all the time.
When did you start using flying faders and things like that for mixing? Or would you do a lot of these records in the early 80s, for example, would that still be mixed by hand as a performance?
Rick, I still mix by hand.
Still mixed by hand. You love pushing faders, right? And hitting buttons. It's a performance.
I treat the console as a musical instrument. It's kind of fun.
I've seen you do it.
Yeah, because I got these big old hands. You know, I can reach a lot of faders. The downside, of course, is I'm not mixing, you know, on a recall system.
Right.
I mean, I write down my settings.
Yeah.
And the EQs and all that. If I'm lucky enough to hit on something that I love, then it goes in the workbook. But the pushing and pulling of it is a big part of what I do, and it makes it harder to come back to something.
Sure.
But I've gone as far as if I've done a magic mix, and I think, okay, what's the insurance policy here? Let's do one without the vocal. So if somebody wants to replace a lyric line or change the phrasing of a vocal moment, then I've got what we call the TV mix to go to. We just put it on that, and then I just cut it into the main mix later.
So you would do that onto a half-inch or a
half-inch. In modern times, I just mix internally to my machine, and I've gotten really good at editing with that system now.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty great system. Yeah. I don't miss the razor blade editing, to be honest with you.
It's interesting because people I talk to that kind of lived through the analog era, They love the digital. They just got sick of doing that, and they love the convenience of working digital.
Well, I mean, imagine back in the day, if you had your master multi-track or 24-track reel, if you wanted to extend a chorus, you'd have to make a copy of that on another machine, cut that tape out, and stick it in back to the mothership. It's a long process.
Oh, yeah.
But in modern times, just ding, I've got a copy, and it's identical.
Yeah.
Those analog copies always sounded a little bit different than the source. The bass drum maybe a little mushier, and the tambourine didn't quite survive, and so there's this whole rigmarole about matching sounds. I can deal with that, but what was hard to deal with in those days was crosstalk from track to track. So couldn't put your vocal next to a really loud tambourine print.
Or next to a bass or something,
or next to a bass, or got into empty time code that'd be licking on everything. It's just a nightmare. The advantage being with analog is there's no latency. So if I found a nice drum blend, I could print with an echo, I could print that on a couple of tracks, and that would be speaking the same language as the source. But on digital, if you do that, the new print is ever so slightly late.
Yes.
And you're going to get an out of phase problem if you try and blend it in with the source. So you got to be thinking those thoughts. I've done it. I've gone an extra generation on a source just to match up to processing.
Would you notice over time, as you're making a record, that the tape would lose the fidelity on the high end? Do you notice things like that, or would you have safety copies of things?
Eno had some stories working with David Byrne where the shedding of the oxide made it such that suddenly things were losing high frequency. I've never really had that problem myself. I like the modern technology. I just have the latency problem is quite a big thing for me because I'm always processing and reprinting.
Yeah.
But make no assumption these reprints will be out of sync with the sources. So, and it gets you thinking about how many of these reprints can you do before you start hearing that things are out of time. I've been in recording sessions, mixing. Somebody's been working on a mix for 2 weeks. I think, does it sound a little like a three-legged dog? And the answer would be yes. Because they put it through all these apps and crazy ass stuff, and now we're about 40 generations away from the source. I can hear it.
I notice you have some nice amplifiers downstairs. You got a lot of nice gear downstairs.
Yes.
Where have you come across these things?
In regards to instruments, I believe that instruments have songs in them. Outside of my involvement. I've gone to a music store and thought, let me try it. And sure enough, I was right, it had songs in them. I've got two Fender Jazzmasters from the early 60s downstairs. I bought them on 48th Street? Yeah, 48th Street, Manhattan.
Yep.
Those beautiful community of stores there with all the best
Used
stuff.
to be there, yeah.
And used to be there. And so I bought those two guitars at that point, and I was right, they had songs with them, and I wrote my first album on one of those Jazzmasters. Just certain pieces just are dear to us, and we hang on to them. I suppose as a photographic analogy, you know, we keep our old lenses.
Yeah.
You might have a beautiful new camera that does fabulous things, but you like the look of an old Carl Zeiss lens, and so you put that one on for the right certain portrait look and whatever it might be. So it's that way with sound. You know, I maintain all my old Korg SDD 3000s in my prime times, and I look like an old vintage guy for doing it because they're going out like light bulbs.
Right. If I were to say, Daniel, if you're going to listen to one record, what's something that you come back to? Not something that you worked on, something that you listen to for enjoyment. Give me a record or two that you just love.
Okay. I have I'm a pool player, so when we play pool, I have a little record player in the corner of the room. It's just no speakers in the ceiling. It's just one little record player. It has its own speaker. And I like to put on Art Tatum and Ben Webster.
Wow.
And just to hear where those people got to at that time, to be the very best at their instruments at that time, and to hear the warmth of the saxophone, a bend saxophone.
Yeah.
I hear it, I get
Kills
the
you.
tears with it. It's like, oh my goodness. I haven't heard it's hard to find somebody with that kind of tone in modern times, because getting back to what you were asking earlier, like, well, what happens through time? You know, do we gain things, and then do we leave things behind? Because the forefathers and mothers are not with us anymore, so we don't know how they did it. But when I hear those old records, I think, with all of the technology that we have today, is there a saxophone that sounds as good as that?
Yeah.
I haven't heard one.
What's a record that you admire that you like to go back and listen to that you think is a great sounding record?
Well, there's specific songs that I go back to. Mellow Down Easy. Do you know that one?
Yeah.
For a drum sound. Mellow down easy. It's explosive. The toms are jumping out of the speakers, and I think, boy, I'd like to be able to come up with something like that in modern times. I like Rosalia's first album. It's called Los Angeles. It came out in 2017, and I think her and her flamenco guitar player, Raul, really hit on something there. And she was able to capture that almost as a thesis to her studies through her teenage years, because they're all, the material on that record, if I have this right, is all traditional material, folk songs really. And she did a rendition of those pieces and came up with a masterpiece. It's really that beautiful, and that's what got me hooked on her as an artist and as a singer. And I appreciate that she got to that through love and devotion and hard work. I still like, in regards to anything that I made, I still like to listen to an Eno Harold Budd record called The Pearl. That's a beautiful record. And about a year later, we made a record called Apollo.
Yep.
And so those records are standouts for me within my own work, because they represent an era well documented. We were very excited about what we were doing. I lived for nothing else, and I made sure that we got the albums we got, and then I was able to move on to something else. But I did not move on until we had something very special documented from that era.
A lot of the drum sounds of yours that to me I love are these, and which you have a lot of, are the beautiful room drum sounds, you know, that are natural and to me never go out of style. If I think of the beginning of Bullet the Blue Sky, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Matter of fact, let's see if I can find that.
Okay, Rick, jeez.
You can find anything. Before we go on, is there an effect on the drum there?
The drums were, when we were mixing,
Yep.
we had access to a warehouse next door, and we put a PA in that room and remiked the PA, so you're hearing of a live chamber that we, Flood, I was working with Flood at the time, and he was excited about this. And it was like a storage area for the band's equipment, and we came up with this idea of having it be a chamber. So that's what you're hearing on there, it's a live room.
When you are doing something like that, if you're mixing, would you actually record it to 2 tracks and have a stereo, so it's actually part of the...
Normally I would print anything.
You'd print that, yeah.
Yeah,
and then you would, so you can adjust the ambience of it later.
Then you've got it, you can play with it, yeah. But in regards to drum sounds and how to record them, I prefer for a drummer to set up a kit and play the whole kit. Then we bring mics around. I don't beat on the snare for an afternoon and then work on another drum separately. We had a session just, a buddy of mine, Kyle Crane, good drummer here in LA, came by, and I said, well, bring your own kit, because I'd heard him at a jazz club the night before. So your kit sounds good, bring it over. So he set it up, and Wayne Lorenz, who I work with, we already had half a dozen mics plugged in with a good sound, you know, nice 44 ribbon microphones and tighter microphones, and then we just got gradually moved the mics in, and then I put up some faders, and that was it.
Yeah.
I didn't say, well, I don't know about the bass drum, could we try, could you hit it again? No. I won't ask drummers to hit a drum. I mean, unless they're playing the kit, but it's like hours on end. That's not a drum sound.
What would be the preferred, let's say back in the 80s, what would you put around a drum set? How many mics would you mic a drum set with? If it's a 4-piece kit or so?
I'm doing the same thing that I did in the 80s.
Okay.
Usually use a 44, which is a ribbon mic. RCA ribbon mic, for those who don't know, it's a diamond-shaped thing, and you see old pictures of Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra in front of these mics. If you're here, 44 about here is nice because you get a little bit of everything.
Okay. You get a picture of that part of the drum kit there, right?
Yes, and then the snare, I don't mic the snare too close because you get a choke sound. So I try and raise it up a little bit, 4 inches above the snare. And sometimes a hi-hat will leak in there and that'll be enough. But I like a close mic on the hi-hat, usually just a dynamic mic of 57. I don't like room miking. Relatively tight miking on the toms.
What would you use for something like that, like a Sennheiser 421?
No, I like the 421, but we've just been using ribbon mics, Shure mics. Hey Wayne, what are we using on the bass drum these days?
D12.
Is that what we use on Kyle?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, AKG D12. But you talked about the 80s.
Yeah.
I'm the only guy in the 80s who didn't go.
That's right.
Listen to those records now; they're embarrassing.
That's right.
And I thought they were at the time.
You used all natural drum sounds.
I said, I'm not doing it.
So this is why, to me, these things are timeless. These recordings.
I don't mind having hockey hair in a picture, but I don't want it in my sound.
Right. How did you avoid doing that? Taste. Right? Aren't you glad? You don't have the big gated reverbs. I mean, that's what we're talking about for those of you that are wondering what we're talking about.
Yeah,
talking about the big.
Well, I just love Jimi Hendrix records so much, and I never heard any of that on Jimmy's records or even Led Zeppelin.
That's right.
They're just natural, beautifully played drums, and
all those open
sensibly
sounds
mic'd.
that have all those open drum sounds. They just never go out of style. They always sound.
They never go out of style.
They always sound modern.
I think I was just lucky enough to be working with some of the great drummers at any given time. Like Manu Katché already had that sound because he was a jazz drummer from Paris.
Yeah.
So we didn't suggest to him that he had to reinvent the drums for himself. He already had a nice vibe. And Brian Blade plays that way. He's just got that touch.
They know how to hit the drums. They know how to tune the drums.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I like urban sounds. I like hip hop records, and when some of that stuff is the best shit, sonically. I think I can hold my head up because I never made a record in the '80s that went boom.
God. All of your production, your records. I mean, when we were listening to the Eno recording earlier, it sounds amazing.
Well, we only try and do what Quincy Jones recommends. Every music has its soul. It's beyond the style of it. Every music has its soul. As a record maker, you have a responsibility to get to the soul of that music, and as a record listener, you have a responsibility to listen to the records that have soul. It's that simple. And if you don't get to a soulful place making a record, don't put it out.
On the Peter Gabriel records you worked on, is there any particular track that you think came out even better than, when you listen to it, you're like, man, we really killed this? Or do you just think of them as a body of work?
Yeah. Well, I think of it as a body of work, really, but I'm impressed with when I hear Don't Give Up by Peter Gabriel. I think, oh, what an unusual collection of sounds and approaches, and I'm reminded about the increments and the evolution. The lyrics came quite late, and the boom, 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 dogga-digga, dogga-ding, dong. It's so unusual that bass line is so odd. I mean, isn't it wonderful if something has a little bit of magic to it and is very unique? I love and hope to make records like that.
When do you know when a record is done, when a song is done?
Personally speaking, I have little dreams. I go to bed and I think, oh, I have an idea that might make an improvement to a song. I think about it and I go in the studio, usually in a private way, and come up with an example to show somebody where things could get to. And if I happen to be right and the idea floats, then that becomes part of the bedrock of that song. I don't rest until all of my
Ideas are exhausted, maybe?
Yeah, I want to make sure, if I've got a clear idea about something I'd like to try, I want to make sure that I have the time to pull that off. The enemy of soul really can be just stacking up too much stuff onto a track and then you lose your way. That's happened to me. In fact, the song Red Rain had too much stuff on it, and in the end I had to pull back the reins and make sure that a lot of things got left out so that Peter's center was properly framed and not just a bunch.
Do you always think about the vocal? Is that always the prime thing? And then it's like, how does everything frame the vocal?
In the end, that's the responsibility. That if you've got a lead vocal, then it has to command the center of the picture. And what will you do to enhance that? Atmospheres can be very useful because you might create a certain vibe to a section of a song, but it doesn't have a lot of parts. Mm-hmm. I think, Dylan's Time Out of Mind record has a lot of that. There these very thick textures and like environments, really, and you're not really hearing people riffing or anything. It's just, It comes on, it's just thick in vibe, and it takes you to a place, kind of a location. And to be able to pull that off without a visual component is a nice achievement, because people will listen to music and decide for themselves where they want to go. The temptations are there to enter your own world of imagination. If the textures are such that they inspire a listener to dig deep and use their own imagination about what the song's about or where it takes them to, I think that's good work done.
With Bob, he's not a guy that wants to sit there and do a bunch of takes, right? He wants to do a couple takes and then move on, and then you're kind of responsible for building around what he did?
Well, Bob Dylan likes to work fast, and I admire that. In the case of Time Out of Mind, I was his music director. So I had all of the songs figured out, had charts, and made sure that all the musicians had an understanding of what the song was about before Bob arrived. So we're not wasting the man's time.
Right.
He might decide on a different key or a different time signature. That's okay. That's not changing the song. That's just changing a couple of things about it. And so by being knowledgeable on the material and guiding the band in such a way that you don't have any train wrecks or not playing too much, in regards to specifically Time Out of Mind, I did clarify to the musicians, we have a nice band in this room. We don't want any familiar components to be applied to this record. So riffs that you've learned along the way,
Leave them out.
leave them out. And think of yourself as characters or components in a panoramic scene, and Bob is a train. So Bob's the slow train, and he's the center. And maybe there's a cactus there, and there's an old coal mine over there, and there's a bird, there's an eagle, there's a rainbow. The train comes upon these components that complete the picture, but they are not the train running. Bob is the train running. And I explained that to the orchestra, and I said, do not play anything familiar. Just make a contribution to the picture.
Does Bob, is he one of these guys that will work on a song and change lyrics if he's on the records that you did with him?
Bob changes lyrics all the time.
And what would you do? Would you punch them then if there was a finished vocal or something? He's like, I have a better second verse.
Yeah. Well, obviously you don't want vocals leaking on everything
Right.
because you know, in order to accommodate a lyric change, then you
Yeah.
can't have the old lyric come through the drums. So we pay attention to all that. In the case of Time Out of Mind, I put Bob on a dynamic mic because he could get right close to it, and he wasn't screaming in the room. But back to the record I made with him earlier than that,
The earlier
Oh
one
Mercy.
from '89.
We sat like the way you and I are sitting here and playing acoustic instruments, but I had pickups on the acoustic instruments. And I sent those pickups to little tweed Fender amps that were hidden around the corner with pillows around them.
Okay.
So that's the sound that was being recorded. We didn't mic them acoustically. With an 808 coming through the wedge, and we played the songs to fixed time, and Bob did his vocals. And in that case, I was able to use the C37A, which is a really nice Japanese tube microphone. And because the guitars were isolated under pillows, the vocal did not leak. So Bob did come in and say, I got another lyric. No problem. Just drop them in right into the track.
So he would really go home and think about this stuff.
I've seen Bob, you know, with a little typewritten song, and then at the end of the day, lots of little amendments, you know, handwritten amendments, many, many of them. Yeah, he's no different than any one of us. He wants his work to be the best it can be, you know, and if he has a couplet that's special, then, you know, finding the best position for that couplet. A very devoted artist in so many ways. Can't say enough about Bob. And a great musicologist.
We talked about this record.
I'm looking for a city on the other side, and when I get there, I'll be satisfied. It's a beautiful city, that's what I've been told, where we are not bought, and we are not sold. Way down, way down, way down, way down, a city on the other side.
Wow.
Way down, way down, a city on the other side.
I don't mean to stop it, but I want to talk about that. That is so beautiful, that record.
We had a little system going during this time. We would cut a track together.
Yep.
And always had organ, Johnny Shepard playing the organ. So we had the advantage of really great pitch, as I talked about, you know, the bass line comes from the organ.
Yeah.
Then the bass is always in tune with the organ.
Right.
But once we had cut the track, the four singers, Jim Wilson, Rocco DeLuca, Johnny Shepard, and myself, would go to the console with handheld mics.
Okay.
And do the vocals one section at a time. No headphones, just speakers. That made for a certain kind of harmonious glue because we were all singing together all the time. And it's what was nice about working with those people. They're all really good singers, all with very unique voices.
So I played it on.
See how I'm playing the bass line,
Yep.
but the chord remains the same. So that song does not have The bass was not played on a bass instrument. It's the organ playing the bottom.
And you have the organ bottom end like that? It's so full.
Very rich
Yeah.
and special. And then you just ride the vocal. Looking for a city on the other side. I'm singing a 4 on top of a root.
Yep.
And when I get there, then rock goes, looking for a city. Because he's got that beautiful high voice. And then Johnny, the beautiful singer from Brian Blades' father's church. That's where I met him in Louisiana, because I played in the church band, you know, for certain services, and I got to know the pastor real well. And so Johnny was the church organist, and I recognized that he was a pure soul, and he had never ventured into pop music and never really strayed from the church. And I thought, well, I'll take it as a sign that we're meant to put that singing group together. And
That's an absolutely beautiful record.
that record was made in this room.
Okay.
So since then, I've moved the studio to the lower part of the building. But there was something about, there was so much equipment in the room that it was nicely muffled down the way I like it.
Would you say that you rarely do headphone singing on your records? That you, if you're singing, or other people that you're recording, you rarely do headphones, right?
I'd say that's true. Although in recent times, you know, when we had Willie Nelson over just last week, we wore headphones for that. We had reasons to do it because I didn't want a bunch of spilling onto Willie's vocal. Obviously, you don't want the speakers to be screaming in the room if you're using mics. But the trick is, don't put the microphones in the speakers. So keep your vocals acoustic.
Right.
It's almost like kitchen singing. And then you just have the mix loud enough that people can hear the pitch and time.
Don't you find that singers sing more in pitch? In my experience, if singers sing to the speakers with their voice not in the speakers, they sing their pitch is much better. You get much more in tune singing without wearing headphones.
I've noticed that myself. The other thing that is best when you're singing in the room, no headphones, is you articulate. Your diction's a little bit better because you're not being satisfied by something right on your ears, so you might clarify the enunciation of words. So that's an advantage. But there's something about, let's call it kitchen singing. There's something about the negotiations that happen in a kitchen environment when you're singing with a group, because you're not trying to, can you turn me up in my monitor? No, there's not. You got to blend.
When you guys were singing together, the four of you, you're hearing yourself acoustically because you're standing right near each other, right?
That's correct, yes.
So that's why the blend is so good as well.
Well, I'm glad you used the word blend, because that's what you try and get to if you're a group singing.
Yeah.
And sometimes we will swap parts. I might say to Rocco, well, you take the top part and I'll come in below you, or let me take the top and come in below. He's got a beautiful range. And so we find the parts that are best for any given singer of that group at that time. And, you know, we might juggle things around and say, oh, surprise, that sounds even better. Even though Johnny's got that beautiful high voice, sometimes we put him at the bottom. I'm a tenor, so I'm usually in the middle there somewhere.
All cams?
Yep, I can see you everywhere.
All right, common.
I noticed when you're tuning the guitar that you tune and you check this different notes and you kind of tune old school.
Yes, old school.
You tune for the particular guitar, right? Kind of to make sure.
I try and tune for the instrument, yeah. This one that Neil Young fell in love with. Mm-hmm. In fact, I lent him this guitar when he went on the road because he wanted the same sound. It was hard for me to get it back from him.
It's got a beautifully balanced mid-range. All the chords speak so well.
Yeah, well, mid-range is the right word because it doesn't boom.
Right.
Because it's a smaller bodied
Yeah.
mahogany instrument, so the it's a little easier in the recording studio because you may get an instrument that has a lot of bass in it, but it's not so friendly in the studio on a microphone. But a lot of what I do is based on finger picking. So a lot of what we did on the Emmylou Harris record, for example, has to do with gentle playing, a lot of finger picking. Ever now and then. So selecting the notes that are a complement to the singing and not, I don't like strumming that much, so
Right.
I don't have a lot of strumming on the records I work on, you know, because I like, if a la, 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 see how that harmonizes?
Yeah.
I'm not playing little tricks like that of
It gives you counterpoint, actually, because there's the moving lines of the guitar against the voice.
counterpoint, yeah. Second line,
Yeah.
support line, how to frame a vocal. Oh, oh, oh. Always, when, especially with live, working with Emmylou, I enjoyed supplying a harmony to everything that she sang. And she came to me, she said, "Were you singing just then?" I said, "No, I'm just playing the guitar." I said, "I've never heard anybody play the guitar like." I said, "Emmy, I'm just harmonizing with your beautiful voice."
Oh, she has such a beautiful voice. When you were making that record, what are things that you remember from that?
I visited Emmy at her house before we made the record, and she had two beautiful dulcimers.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know, dulcimer, you play it on your lap, and it's like, well, that's not a very good example of it. It's more of an Appalachian sound, and a single note has two strings, so we'll call it a double string note. And I had my little box mandolin guitar, same thing, two notes, two strings per note. My 12 string, two strings per note. Then we found a really nice Chickering piano, an upright, and of course a piano is multiple strings for a given note. And we discovered that by having brought the dulcimers into the studio, now we had these multiple string instruments, and that became part of the tapestry of the sound of Wrecking Ball. I didn't know that until I went to Emmy's house and I saw the dulcimers sitting there. I thought, oh, let's bring those in because they're beautiful instruments. Because I wanted to have this Appalachian, I wanted to represent Emmylou in the old American sound, in the way of the old American sound. I was not all that interested in modern country. I was interested in knowing where she came from and how she came up. Because she's from Alabama and went to folk music as a young artist. So she had all that in her. She had studied all the folk songs and knew the traditions and the instruments. So I wanted to make sure that we went there, but we went to the future with it. But we talked about it in the kitchen, sidestepping the cuckoo's nest of a genre.
Right.
It's okay to respect something from the past, but we don't want repetition of it. We have a responsibility to get to an innovative place. So tradition and future all the time.
Blending those, really.
The streets are cracked, and there's glass everywhere, and a baby stares out with motherless eyes. in Ottawa.
Who's playing drums on that?
Brian Blade
It is
is
Brian
playing
Blade.
drums
He
on
plays
that.
on, I think, on only this song, maybe?
I think only this song, because we had finished a session with Larry Mullen, so he had already gone back to Dublin. And this song came late as a contender. And so I cut that one in New Orleans, and Brian Blade happened to be in town, and he came by and played that kind of amazing beat. But it's based on oh, the streets are crying, there's glass everywhere, and a baby stands out with a motherless eye. But I played it on my little Vox Mando guitar, which has that upper octave sound. But as I hear it now, I realize how sparse it all is.
Yeah.
So there's not much getting in the way of Emmy's voice.
Her voice is so dynamic. The way that you captured it, I think, is beautiful. It sounds so natural. There's parts where it disappears a little bit first on some of the ends of the phrases.
Yes.
Is there anything you remember about how you recorded her?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, the disappearing part of the voice is just something that Emmy does. She goes to more of an airy sound on some of her, on the resolve of some of her phrases.
Yeah.
Which is a very beautiful thing. And you might not get to hear that if the track is too dense. So I wanted to make sure that the little details of her, all the nuances in her voice were heard. No headphones. We had a little circle, the way you and I are sitting. And when we had guests, Steve Earle came in. So Steve is the drum here, let's say. And Lucinda Williams was just on the other side.
I mean, would you actually just record it like that, though?
Record like this.
Oh my God.
If we had drums and bass, Tony Hall played bass.
Mm-hmm.
He had his amp in a booth, and he'd come right next to us and play with us. We had two kits for Larry Mullen. We had his full-size kit. Then we had what we call more of an acoustic kit. We call it the Flintstones kit. We might use a hairy drum like this and a tambourine and this and that. And sometimes that's nice because it doesn't make as much noise. And then we can invite Larry to sit with us and treat it like a kitchen performance. But kitchen performances are pretty familiar to the Irish. So we didn't have any trouble convincing Larry to join us at the kitchen circle.
Right.
It was very sweet of him to do that. I can't believe it even happened, because at that time I had a very nice creative rapport with Larry, because we'd done so many good things in the studio, and Larry loves country music. So I called him up. I said, "Would you come in?" And he agreed to do it. And I still can't believe it happened. But I wanted the power and the weight of his playing, not by volume, but by heart. Because everything Larry plays, as I said to you in the kitchen, everything Larry plays sounds deep. And I wanted that deep sound in the bottom end.
One of the best sounding records and that I know is Actung Baby.
That's a wild record.
That is a wild record. Everything about that record, it blows me away. The tones, the songs, the performances.
Huh. That's something, huh? Well, we largely made that record in Berlin in a studio called Hansa. Mm-hmm. And it has the most beautiful orchestra room, like a full size. You could put a 100-piece orchestra in there. So that's the room we recorded the band in. The control room was down the hall and no window, so we had camera communication. But we did a very special thing. We made sure that the band room had the monitor system in it, so the main control room didn't have to deal with headphones or getting a mix.
They
for
could
anybody.
control their own mixes.
They could just do their own thing, and then we had Joe O'Hurley, who is does live sound with U2. Terrific man and old friend. And so Joe was, we put him to work. We had our own console in the band room, so he could do headphones and take care, provide respond to people's needs, so we didn't have to bother Flood in the other room.
Bass line and the chord changes, it's amazing how that bass line fits over all those chord changes. It's really so unusual, actually.
Yeah. Let's call Adam. Adam, how did you do it? He just stuck to his story and barreled on through.
You know what I mean? And when it hits the chord, it's so satisfying when the middle of the chorus, when the chords change.
Yeah.
On the hook line, it's beautiful. And in the verse, is it like a little organ or something that's going along? What is that sound?
I think it's just a little synthesizer from Eno. We had to do something. We were in the room with him.
Now, that drum beat there, this was kind of a departure, this type of groove drumming on this record.
This one, and there's another track on that record called You're So Cruel.
Yeah.
Really, really nice beats. A little funkier than what Larry had done in the past, that's right. At this point, he had broadened his repertoire. Larry just kept getting better and better.
Yeah.
So we were lucky to be able to.
His drumming really changed on this record, the types of parts that he did.
And the way that Bono's vocal, his falsetto became so beautiful that we wanted to make sure we got that on the record. So
it's interesting. Bono's singing from Unforgettable Fire to Actung, very, very different. So Unforgettable Fire, you didn't have those, really the kind of low singing like you do on With or Without You, right? Using his low part of his range. And then his upper part of his range, he's singing full voice. And then Actung, he's singing in falsetto. I mean, he's really using different timbres in his voice. It really developed in those, what would that be, 7 years from 84 or so to 91 or so.
Yeah. People change and people evolve, and we always had a bit of a joke that some folks said, he's changed, as if that would be bad. Of course I've changed. That was 7 years ago. It was just very nice to see the evolution in people's skills and musical knowledge, really. Because put yourself in their shoes, they started their band as teenagers, so they never went to music school. So they didn't have the advantage of having studied theory, and probably to their benefit. But it was a nice part of our work relationship because I was able to remember parts, and as I hear these things, I say, oh yeah, that's me, and the Edge singing the background vocals. So we're good part singers.
So Flood worked on this, right?
Yep, Flood worked on that.
Did Flood work on Joshua Tree as well?
Yes, he did, yeah. Great engineer, and really the studio rats, let's call us. It's a four-part Flood, Edge, and myself, because Edge gets in there too, We had a reputation for coming up with a new guitar sound for every record we worked on. Mm-hmm. And so when Actung Baby came around, we had this, I think it was a Korg A3, had this had that, called an envelope follower, sort of an auto wah. It was one of the settings in that new box. We were pretty excited about it. But Edge is a real he has a bit of scientist in him, so he's quite good at coming up with new sounds. And so we always had that in the room, like, what are we going to do now to break to the next sonic barrier?
Would he use the Korg? What is it?
SDD 3000. That's the echo machine that Edge went into after the Memory Man.
Okay.
When they got started, he was just using the Memory Man.
And then he started using that when on
Unforgettable Fire.
Unforgettable Fire. Okay.
Yes, he already had that rig. In fact, it was Edge who introduced me to the SDD 3000. I still use it now.
Yeah.
Because it does quite long delays. It's good for triplets.
Yep.
Even on a slow song. And then it had capacity to remember settings. So it was a very useful box. So Edge always had the echo thing going, since even long before my time. And then we just kept going with the excitement of making guitar sound discoveries, you know.
Would the four of you get together and just be at the studio without the other guys there a lot of time?
Yeah, there'd be some of that, of course, especially in Edge like late nights.
Uh-huh.
So we had a lot of late night guitar sessions. But some of them would just be, well, what about the chords, you know? Should we try it this way or try it that way? And I say, well, you know, the song One comes to mind that we're batting around chord sequences, and then ultimately I said, well, Edge, what if we hook these two together? And you know, so we'd have these kind of conversations, because when the singer comes in, he wants to get juiced up by something.
Right.
It's not going to be drugs. So you have to have a fresh musical component to get him excited to pick up the microphone. And so that was the responsibility of the science room, let's call it. It was up to us to come up with special surprises for Bono to work off of.
Tell me about Bono as a singer in the studio. When I watch live versions of him back, if I watch, you know, watching the Rattle and Hum movie, for example, I saw him sing back in the, you know, back then live, and he was such a good live singer. His pitch, time, tone. Yeah. I mean, really incredibly good singer.
Yeah. What can I say, man? Such a singer as Bono remains an inspiration to me. But he's a great guitar player. Did you know that?
No.
Oh. He'll pick up a guitar and play a riff, all the wrong notes.
Okay.
But the phrase will be great. Play something like this and be completely screwed up. It's like, what? But the phrase will be great because he's a singer. Uh-huh. So he's going to be in front of 60,000 people. What's the top line and what's the phrase going to be?
A thing that is really amazing about him that I've always thought, he has incredible variety in his melodies. He does not repeat melodic ideas from record to record, from song to song. He has very sophisticated melodies and does not have licks that he just kind of falls back on.
Yeah, well, melody is that's an interesting subject matter. Obviously, we touched on it earlier on when I talked to you about the penny whistle and slide guitar, single note. In regards to those fellas in Dublin, they heard all those great traditional Irish singers. And even though they weren't making that music, they heard it and they respected that a lot of greats had come before them. Black Velvet Band. Mm-hmm. She wore that black velvet band. And it was completely rock and roll as a delivery. And I thought, whether you're making that music or not, if you came up listening to those pub singers,
that's right,
and delivering those melodies with that intensity, that's going to get into you. Beyond the specifics of the music, it might get to you in terms of a communication.
One of the things that I like to ask people is, what makes a great melody? What are the elements of a great melody?
Some of the great melodies have been the simplest. And we love them for that. Quand le soleil dit bonjour aux montagnes, for example. It's really a hymn, isn't it? And I like to reference Killing Me Softly as an unusual and great melody.
Yes.
I'm trying to sing on that.
That is such an odd melody, beautiful melody.
And I'm glad that Lauryn Hill did a version of that with the Fugees. And it was a nice reminder about how melody cuts through all eras, really. Even if we've lived through a decade of non-melodic music, it's definitely going to come back again. And that's what I love about Unending Ascent on the Apollo record. We heard that earlier. I teared up listening to it.
Yeah.
And I made it, and I teared up. And I didn't tear up because of, being nostalgic. I teared up because it was that great a melody. It will never go out of fashion, melody. And what makes for a great melody? Sometimes it could be in a Clint Eastwood movie, and that would be enough. They're signatures.
Yeah.
They're triggers. They're little buttons. They trigger memories. They trigger emotions. Yeah, man.
Do you know when something, if you're working on a song and it's doesn't quite have, it's missing something, or it doesn't have the hook that it needs, or will you keep working on it until it has that?
Sometimes persistence pays off. A song may not have reached that state where you would say, yeah, that's a finished song, because the era I come up through, with a lot of studio composition. So we learn to be patient, because something may come around that we don't have yet that will lead the way for us, either by some little melodic signature, or maybe a riff or a bass line. We may choose to change the bass line. So for that approach to work in studio composition, you have to be very patient, because you may not get it on the day. You may get it on a day of the next week, and so on and so on. And the Peter Gabriel So album has a lot of that in it, that Peter didn't have all of his components to begin with. We added them along the way, and they inspired more to come. As a young guitar player, I was able to play melody and bass line and chords at the same time, like. So to play melody and get your bass line and chords all happening at the same time, that's a little three-piece band in the hands of one dude.
Is there anyone that you didn't get to work with that you would like to have, that maybe didn't live long enough, or didn't live in your time?
I was introduced to Miles Davis with the view of making a record with him. I met him in New York, and he passed before we had a chance to work together. That's the only one like that.
That's a pretty big one, Miles.
A pretty big one. And then there's some other ones that I should have done that I didn't do.
Would you mention them or not?
Yeah, Sinead O'Connor's first album. I was already in Dublin. I was asked. I was burnt out. I said, no, I don't think I can do this. I was asked to do a PIL record. Should have done that one.
That's funny to think back, right? To I should have done these records, or you get asked, and for whatever reason, scheduling, you're burnt, and then the time passes, and
I spent an hour on the phone talking to Carlos Santana. I love Carlos. We never made that record. What was wrong with me? you know what Carlos said to me? He says, I'd love to work with you, even if not in this lifetime.
That's amazing.
I wasn't sure if he was being spiritual. He said, "Well, fuck you, Lanois. You're gonna do it or not."
That is great.
I should call him up.
That is great. I want to talk about Willie Nelson, about the record.
Yeah.
Talked a little bit about it.
Somebody pick up my pieces. I'm scattered everywhere, and put me back together. put me way over there. Take me out of contention. I surrender my crown. Somebody pick up my pieces. It's just me coming down. Well, I sure thought I had her. Lord, I know she had me. But what I thought was heaven is just fall and debris. Well, I may not be crazy, but I got one hell of a start. Somebody pick up my pieces. I think I'm falling apart. And don't follow my footsteps. Step over my trail. The road is too narrow. Your footing could fail. And the fall to the bottom
Is this just all played together? Is there any extra things or anything that's fixed in there?
That's a live off.
That's just all live,
That's
right?
all live,
Yeah.
yeah.
This whole record was pretty much all live,
That's
right?
right. I overdubbed the bass on a few things, but it's pretty much live, yeah. There's a nice story that goes with the making of this record. I had met Willie, I think it was in Las Vegas on his bus. I said, what was it like when you got started out as a kid? And he said, well, we were a dance band. We played weekend clubs, and people could go cheek to cheek or do a two-step, and so we were weekend entertainment because people worked hard all week. They wanted to have a good time on the weekend. I said, what were the places like? Well, they had booths and different little sections, and so I got excited about this idea, and I called my crew. I said, I was renting a theater in Oxnard at the time, kind of a blank canvas. I said, make it like a Texas nightclub with a little bit of a Cuban twist to it, because we had two great drummers joining us, Victor Indrizio and Tony Mangurian. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make sure that we had everything that Willie remembered about the dance hall, but we had a little bit of a rhythmic twist to it. No headphones. His sister Bobby, I put her at my little Wurlitzer piano. She had her amplifier right there. I said, Bobby, you got two volume controls, one for the Wurlitzer, and this other keyboard is your cello, your little quartet. Mm-hmm. So the quartet button and the Wurlitzer button. You balance them the way you like, and just no headphones, you just play along with everybody. And she had such a good time. And so that's what you're hearing at the beginning of Pick Up the Pieces, if that's what it's called. You can hear Aunt Bobby complimenting Willie. We lost Aunt Bobby a year ago.
The sun is filled with ice and gives no warmth at all. And the sky was never blue. The stars are raindrops searching for a place to fall. And I never cared for you. I know you won't believe these things I tell you. No, you won't believe. Your heart has been forewarned, all men will lie to you. And your mind cannot conceive. Now all depends on what I say to you. And on your doubting me. So I've prepared these statements far from true. Pay heed and disbelieve.
Love that.
The sun is filled with ice and gives no warmth at all. sky was never blue.
Right?
Stars and raindrops searching for a place to fall.
That's a great line.
I never cared for you.
It's touching.
Yeah.
What it is, that's Aunt Bobby playing the left hand on the Wurlitzer because there's no bass on there.
Right.
So boom, dun, 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 dun. Isn't that sweet?
It's amazing.
And then Mickey Raphael on the bass harmonica. I'm so glad you played that because it has a lot of freedom in it.
Yes.
There's no fixed time on this record.
Right.
So we're just, the time is wide open.
Yeah.
And I can just see myself counting 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, boom, because somebody had to count it in. I think that was me because you got the, Willie does the intro, free time.
Yep.
And then the groove happens. I think that was.
Now, making a record like that, is that particularly challenging because you have to capture everything all at once and you can't really fix things on that?
No, there's always an element of risk in the air, and that's what's great about it. It's like, are we doing okay? Yeah, we're doing okay. Of course, we haven't had Willie Nelson singing, so it's hard to go wrong in terms of a vocal delivery.
Right.
Got that beautiful.
What a tone! What phrasing! Everything.
Yeah, and what a trooper! You know, we had a nice little scene going because he had his bus or trailer, I forget which one it was, in the parking lot of the theater.
Okay.
And he'd hang out there and wait for me to come out and get him. Okay, Willie, we're ready for you now. We're ready for your close-ups, Willie. And he'd come in and we did 2 takes and that was it. Well, more records should be made in 4 days. It'll balance out some of the records I made in England. 2 years.
Is that the longest you've taken is 2 years on a record? Does that seem absurd to you now, looking back?
It's not absurd. It's just what happened on those records.
Yeah.
You know, people were searching for sounds that had never been heard before. I mean, that Willie Nelson record is a beauty, but all the sounds are familiar.
Yeah.
Whereas you listen to Actung Baby or some of the, maybe the Peter Gabriel work, you hear things that you never heard before.
Right.
And so to bump into those sounds and to pay attention to them and develop them, that takes a lot of time. You know, we reference Emmylou's record, how I discovered the dulcimers and the 12-string and the multiple string instrument sound. Let's call that the menu of that record.
Okay.
That record, we were lucky enough to hit on a few sounds early on that became part of the menu, and this is what we're going to be serving on this album. All albums have that somehow, or you hope to get to that place, so you're not just repeating stuff you did a couple of years earlier. And so the Willie record, it had its own thing with the Wurlitzer and the cellos and the Emmylou Harris record had its own thing. The Actung Baby record had its own thing. We made discoveries that belonged to that time, to those projects, and we put them on the menu. We completed the records with those ingredients in mind, and that's why they have a specific personality.
All your records have this sonic consistency throughout the entire record. To me, that's what makes a record a classic record. It's not just having these timeless songs, flagship songs that are massive hits worldwide, but there's a sonic consistency to them. The Joshua Tree, from Red Hill Mining Town to In God's Country to Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For to The Streets Have No Name to With or Without You, there's just a sound to the record.
Yeah. Well, how does that happen, Rick?
How does that happen? You made the records. How does that happen?
First of all, we don't think about it too much while we're doing it,
Yeah.
other than, maybe there's a pedal that, I brought in a cheap K pedal that became bow, wow, 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 or something like that. Those would be specific gadgets. But what is not a gadget is who people are and what drives them philosophically and who they are as soulful human beings. All the things that can't be described by curriculum or otherwise would qualify as things we carry in us as humans for having lived. And when we start working on a record, the exchange that happens includes all of these life experiences that we've we bring to the table. And if you're in a room with people you admire, then you're welcome.
But you were making, the Joshua Tree was a specific sounding record. The type of instrumentation, the drum sounds, the ambience, the style. I mean, if you think of Running to Stand Still or something like that, these are really, only would belong on the Joshua Tree. That record, that would not belong on Actung Baby.
Well, Running to Stand Still was pretty much an acoustic captured performance. Eno and I in the room with the band, and that's pretty much live off the floor. Other things are a little more driven by technology. My good friend Michael Brook had invented this infinite sustain guitar that we use on With or Without You. And it had just come out of the case, and Edge pulled it out. So, wow, let's plug it in and see what's on. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I said, well, hang on, let me cue up a track, and let's try, do a take. We're just trying to. Oh, that was pretty good. Let's try another one. And those are the two final tracks.
I mean, isn't it interesting that these things then become just part of popular culture, the songs that will be heard forever, yet they were created. There was nothing on tape, and then all of a sudden there's the song, you know, and they start somewhere, and he can pull out something like that. Oh, let's mess around, and yet that performance is captured, and you can't even imagine that not existing. Yet at the time, just messing around kind of created that, right?
Well, at the time what's interesting about those sessions and pretty much all the records I've worked on is we remain loyal to the people in the room. We don't bring in outside talent other than on Sledgehammer. We brought in these amazing singers from London. I'm glad they came in because I couldn't sing those parts. But by and large, we take full advantage of the house talent and make sure that the record is made for the people in the building and not bring in too much else. And I believe people feel the commitment and the care, and I believe that adds to the soulfulness of a body of work, and people resonate with that, as they resonate with the Willie Nelson record, because they really sense there's people in the room.
Right.
Some records you hear and they sound fantastic, but you don't think there's people in the room.
Right. Yeah. Is that you playing the guitar part there?
Yeah, me and DR.
You could have a steam train if you just lay down your tracks. You could have an airplane flying.
I love all the space in the bass.
Bring your blue sky back. All you do is call me. I'll be anything you need.
Is there an octaver on the bass on some of those notes?
You could have a big dipper
Oh yeah.
going up and down all around the bends. You could have a bumper car bumping. This amusement never ends. I wanna be your sledgehammer. Why don't you call my name? Oh, let me be your sledgehammer. This will be my testimony.
It's so fresh sounding still.
If you saw the studio this was recorded in, you'd laugh. It was a cow barn. A little
Was
nice-
that his Peter's
He
farm
was
or
renting.
something?
He was renting a place in the country at the time, a little village called Ashcombe,
Okay.
and had 3 buildings in it, and we were in one of them.
Kind of a makeshift studio.
A bit of a scuzzy control room, a little bit like what we're going to see downstairs when we go to my studio. We were having trouble finding a drummer to play on some of this. We tried out a few folks, all great drummers, but I said to Peter, we need somebody who can really play the hi-hat, plays the sock cymbal real well, you know, so a little bit of a shuffle in it, you know, so that we're not just not meathead with the drums, you know.
Right.
Kind of, it's a very North American thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Because they never shuffled out of the UK.
yeah,
And
yeah.
my heart sank when we tried it a couple of times with different drummers. I'm not going to mention their names, and it didn't work out. And there was a guy named from Senegal hanging around. His name was Georges Acogné. And Georges said, I know a guy in Paddy who's good. He's got some swing in him. Okay, I said, let's take a chance. And it turned out to be Manu Katché. And so Manu came in. I said, I can't get anybody to he says, I got you. And he went out and he did that in one take.
Oh my God. Wow.
But we had a nice little vibe going at that time because, as I said to you in the kitchen, I like people to show up early. I'm running early, not running late.
You showed up early today.
I did show up early.
You did.
So we'd show up for work, and I'd say, no distractions, straight to work. And Peter had a bunch of those yellow construction hard hats in the other room in the shop. So you had to show up wearing your hard hat. And I'd say to him, okay, let's hit it with a sledgehammer. We'd start working, and that's what the song
Oh my
became.
gosh. That's amazing. This is a pretty complex track, though. There's a lot of parts on it.
Yeah.
This is a really sophisticated arrangement. Now, how long would a song like this take to make?
Well, the So album was done in 1 year.
Yeah.
And Sledgehammer started out as just a beatbox beat. Something very simple.
Mm-hmm.
And we built the whole song, and then the drums were added late, and the bass was added late, and then we went to New York to record.
Is that Tony playing the bass on it?
Tony Levin playing the bass.
Yeah.
And Well Spotted, he's using a little octave machine, and then we're using the SSL, every knob on the SSL all the way up. That's how you get that bass. But we recorded the Memphis horns in the power station in New York.
You're moving around for this then? on
Yeah,
this.
we moved around for this.
So you knew that you wanted to have the horns, and so you're flying the tapes around and doing overdubs in different places.
I've been through customs.
Did Manu come to the barn? He didn't do the drum
Oh yeah, the
checks.
drums were done at the barn.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the bass. We just did the horns. We did the horns in New York.
And then where did you mix this record?
Back of the barn.
Okay.
And we had, there's a famous speaker called the Oratone.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody had them in the 70s. It's just a little one component and has no bass or any top. So we had a pair of Oratones, and then I bungeed another set of speakers on top. They were a Radio Shack copy of a German speaker called a Little David, like a Braun speaker. So this was a Radio Shack mimic of a Braun on top of an Oratone strapped together. Just the terminals jump from one to the other, and that's what we mixed the record on.
So, wait, you mixed this record with Oratones, no more full range?
Oratones and the Radio Shack speakers.
And the Radio Shack speakers, but the Oratones are this big, though.
They're this
Daniel.
big. Yes, that's right.
Well, how did you know you got the low end right?
Well, Peter had some nice Lanois golds as well, a 15-inch coaxial.
Yeah.
So I would reference that for bottom.
This has great bottom on it.
It really does. I was worried about the bottom on Sledgehammer. I didn't think I'd gotten it right. But as Jimmy Iovine always said, the bass sounds better in the top 10.
When you saw these studios close around the country, probably around the world in the last 25 years or so, does it make a difference to you? Do you care, or do you feel kind of, is it sad at all?
There's a little bit of sadness with any era that comes to an end. And I miss the devotion that went with it all, having an understanding of equipment and working with techs and so having built a few studios myself, then I was sad to see the glory days of the big recording studios come to an end, but c'est la vie, and what do we have consequently? people can make records at home, great records at home. Everybody's gotten pretty good with the gear, and so you get a lot of nice surprises. I mean, I don't know her personally, but as I understand, Billie Eilish worked with her brother in a very private setting, and they came up with something very special as a point of reference. And so I like it all. I like road dogging. I like being in the studio, whatever it takes to get to that magic place.
Which you've gotten to many times.
Well, we keep our fingers crossed that we're going to get to it. Hey, man, it's a God-given talent, so everything else is just get your rolling out of bed and get to work. You handle this one, kid.
All right, I shall. Marker.
Thank you.
Okay, so you ready to roll?
Oh, I'm ready to roll.
Follow me, Rick,
Yep.
this way. Now watch your step here. It's a little underlit.
Yeah.
But you'll, there's a railing there.
Beautiful stairway.
My old analog machines that we don't use right now.
Wow. When was the last time you turned those on?
Well, probably last record made on those would have been Bob Dylan's Time Out of Mind.
Okay.
It was all analog. So this is it. It's not all that glamorous. What's nice about it is it's really dense down here, so there's no room sound, because I don't like room sounds. Just keep things tight. I got my acoustic piano. We got a Mellotron, a CP70, a bunch of guitars.
Coles here. I see the RCA here.
That's right. This is the RCA 44 that we were talking about upstairs.
Yep.
So usually we put it around this zone here. And oftentimes the 44 will have the bulk of the sound.
Yeah. And
it's
you have the D12 down here on the kick drum.
D12 down there, and otherwise I think we're on 57s.
Yep.
Yep.
Looks like
So
it.
that's it. And I don't know what Wayne's got queued up here.
But I see things. I see your AMS here. I see your Pultex here. I see,
What we do is we hit the Pultex and then we hit the Neve compressors. So that's kind of like a mastering chain before. And so I don't hear that while I'm at the console. I hear it when I listen through the whole chain.
This is a BCM 10, is that right? The Neve there?
Yeah, these are little 10-channel Neve consoles from the 70s.
1073s.
And this is what we used to this day. We use that for mic pre's.
Yep.
And I haul all of this stuff to Miami when I recorded Bob Dylan at Criteria. We brought all my specialty pieces, all my lenses. This is the beast of it's a Midas. It's the last analog console they made, called the Heritage 4000. I have two of these. This one and its sister in Toronto. So I have the same equipment in both studios.
And this is your radar.
Yeah,
right?
that's the controller. The brains are down there.
Yep.
And I don't even know what Wayne's got queued up here for. Something I'm working on with Micah Nelson. My piano playing's gotten a little better.
Been doing. You just finished your record.
So what this has going is the rhythm's like an engine, and the melodies keep evolving.
Ooh, nice.
A blue chord. There's the 5 section. Probably write some vocals over top of this. my Cuban piano playing. And then,
Oh, beautiful.
I mean, it's unfinished work, but the melodies are there to be expanded on, you know.
Do you find that working on a radar system is more like working on a tape machine?
Well, by controller, yes. And this is similar to Pro Tools in the sense that you see tracks that are coming, can be handy. See if I can dial something else up. This one I just did with Micah. As you can hear, the drums are in the spirit of what we were talking about upstairs,
Yeah.
you know.
Cold zipper in the morning, up her back. We're running to a funeral, never coming back. And there's a fire wheel spinning up in the sky. It flickers in her eyes and it turns to black, and we're gone. Daylight come.
So you can hear my special atmosphere sounds. Otherwise, the drums are just like a little jazz recording.
They pulled us over near the border as my coffee cup came slipping from my hands, running down my pants. But I should
Beautiful.
have known better than
Wow.
to curse my luck.
Storytelling
I saw the siren
here.
blow up as the lightning struck, and we're gone. Daylight come.
Hear that little
We're
detail
gone.
right here.
Daylight come.
Like my piano playing. Taurus bass. You hear the rack tom?
She said you got a bloody box of frogs in your brain as we flew through the desert in the howling rain. I said, turning back now wouldn't make no sense. Then we crashed that truck through the border fence, and we're gone. Daylight come,
Beautiful bass there.
and we're gone.
And
Daylight,
Daryl Johnson on bass from New Orleans.
Wow.
and we're gone.
And then a little instrumental. Check out the bass here. And then the kick.
Wow.
When the sky opened up
And
like
it made this
a
little
party
opera
crowd,
voice.
we saw a hidden map forming in the
That's
clouds.
Micah singing
But the
falsetto. I'm
warning
sampling
dreams I've
him.
seen a million times. It flickers in her eyes in the morning light, and we're gone.
Beautiful.
Daylight come, and we're gone. Daylight
I
come,
like that we got to a little Hendrix place with the guitar.
and we're gone. Daylight come, and we're gone.
I just make sure that every part complements another. No strumming.
No strumming. Illegal.
Check out the rack tom. That's how deep we get excited about rack toms.
Right. So the piano sounds, I love the muted piano. So I was looking over here.
Yeah, that's all it is, Rick. It's
The tea towels on there?
We put little tea towels up here. So. And by using the tea towels, it takes the harshness away from the notes.
Yeah.
So you can play more.
Beautiful.
So you get more of a music box feeling
Yes.
from it. don't like pianos that sound harsh or too loud. That's okay, you know, if you're going to hear a concert pianist, you know, at an opera house or something, then you might want a thundering 9-foot Steinway for those intense moments. But for my purposes...
And you're using ribbon mics on this too, right? Are those ribbons?
These are tube, that's a C37A.
Okay.
It's a tube mic, Japanese, and then in the back I'm using a Coles ribbon.
Okay.
Yep.
4038?
I forget the model of the Coles. Well, that's it right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one right there.
And I see your LA2As over here. I see 4 of them.
Yes, and those are for preamps. And we use those to get to, as I explained upstairs, you know, we use a chosen microphone. I like a BK5. I think that's my BK5 here. That's a ribbon microphone.
Yep.
BK5 into either a Neve or an API preamp into the LA2A. And as I mentioned earlier, you see that knob on the left?
Yep.
I always keep, if I'm recording a vocalist, I always keep that in so that I can do the human.
Right, so
I'm the human
leveler,
compressor.
right?
That's right, leveler.
I noticed that you have some nice amplifiers in the room over here.
Sure, man.
Not that I scoped it out or anything earlier, but you know.
Well, this is where all the important people hang out. These are the amps that I've collected from the late 50s. That's my favorite era of Fender amplifiers. I have a variety of them. And as I mentioned to you, Rick,
Got the tags.
these are the service tags. And when Neil Young came in, he says, that's my kind of guy, service tags.
Love it.
Otherwise, we just have a bunch of... When we're finished the session with you, I'm going to fish out all these drums because I'm doing a drum session next week. So I got take these out of the mothballs and see.
What is that, like a 30-inch kick drum?
No,
there?
that's a 28.
28? That thing is huge, just like a marching.
That's Brian Blade's drum.
Man,
kit.
that's a massive kick.
After he did some work with Joni Mitchell, he dropped them up here because he didn't have any cases. They've been here ever since.
Wow, beautiful.
And then, you know, we have this little beautiful guitar here.
Oh my gosh.
I got this, I was working in New York on 14th Street, a little studio, a nice place called Baby Monster. And the owner had this, and I tried it. I said, wow, if only, when I grew up, I'd like to have one of these. He said, well, I got a tax bill to pay. So I bought it from him.
You grew up.
And this one here I got from Artie Smith in New York. Artie's a well-known drum tech, and he rents out equipment. So this is a 1950...
54 maybe? What year would that be?
I think it's 54 or 55.
Yep.
Somebody dropped PAFs, humbuckers in it.
Yep.
They've been rewired. The neck's been broken and repaired, so it's a dog, but it's a beautiful dog. And when I'm doing something delicate and I don't want any interference from radio frequencies, then I go to this because of the humbuckers. You know. For those who don't know, I mean, humbuckers is just really, you take, you put common information out of phase, and it gets rid of common information, which happens to include RF or magnetic field. That's the technical part of the interview.
People know what humbuckers are that watch my channel, I think, most of the people.
These are little stations here. I know they don't look like much, but stations have their own sounds, and before we get going next week, I'll make sure that with Wayne, the drums are already mic'd up. We're going to have our synthesizers ready to roll. My steel guitar will be plugged in, so we can just jump from one station to the next and not have to wait to hear a sound.
Is this a 60s AC30 there? What is that?
Yes.
Early 60s?
Yeah, this is my favorite one, called The Dark Animal. If you hear this track that I did with Dylan, it's called Most of the Time. There's seemingly a little chamber orchestra playing along. Mm-hmm. It's 4 Les Paul parts done through this Vox up to 10.
Okay.
And so I played each part single note, and then in the end they intertwined to become this little orchestra behind Bob.
Sennheiser 409. I haven't seen one of those in a long time. Those are great guitar mics, right? Amp mics.
Yes, 409, a personal favorite. I don't know if they're made anymore.
No, I think they stopped in the maybe early 90s or so.
Yeah, that sounds about
And do you
right.
like to have it a little distant away from the...
Well, in this case, that's the way Wayne chose to do it, but I usually just favor one of the 12s.
Yeah.
I don't know why he did it like that. I'm going to slap him. Otherwise, it's some of the usual stuff. You know, this beautiful ES330.
Yeah.
We use this on Willie Nelson's Teatro. Normally plays his little guitar called Trigger, but he made an exception in regards to this. He played it. And he was here last week and played it again. So.
Wow, fantastic.
It's not very glamorous or anything.
Looks glamorous to me.
We're pretty old school. See all those tapes there on the door and
I
the
do.
wall? Those are just the strips to
Yeah.
clarify what it is that's coming up on a given channel. So it's kind of fun to see that.
You keep some from some old sessions and things like that,
That's all
right?
one session.
One
That's all
session.
one
Wow.
record right there.
Crazy.
Yeah, my brother.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. We have devoted hearts in the room, and I can feel it. And I'm going to take our day and turn it into something else, Rick. You know,
Great.
Isn't that the way it goes when you meet people?
Yes,
and
it
you get
is.
Inspired.
Absolutely.
So, I wish you the very best with your work, and thanks for taking time to pay attention to mine. And you got my number now. Give me a call any old time. Anything you're
Great.
excited about, I want to hear about.
Great. I will.
That goes for you, Pavel.
Cut.
That's a cut.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.